Thank you, Fizzle.
He ran up on a chop, he's a boxer. Pow, right in the kisser. It's a stick, this a drum, I'll drop some, nigga. Pow, right in the kisser. I'ma shoot the K until the cops come. Pow, right in the kisser. We did him like that cause he's a spot burner. Pow, right in the kisser. Pull up with the stick with the drum, who won't run with me? Pow, right in the kisser. Stupid shells dumping out the chop, it's a hundredty. Pow, right in the kisser. I'ma pull it out the Louis bag, don't come for me. Pow, right in the kisser. I just dumped a nigga in some Christian Louboutins. Pow, right in the kisser. I just shot a nigga granny house, don't care who in there. Pow, right in the kisser. I can't trust the niggas that I hang with, they be shooting kids. Pow, right in the kisser.
I'll smoke a nigga like a Swiss or a pack of cigs.
Pow, right in the kisser.
I pull up with a chop on the ops and split a wig. For real.
Pow, right in the kisser.
I broke his bitch, he poppin', now I'm poppin' on Fed.
Pow, right in the kisser.
We didn't drop by, we walked him down, put him in a ditch.
Pow, right in the kisser.
I got this FN across a nigga, treat him like a Christian.
Pow, right in the kisser.
And my Christian Louboutins running, chasing me a victim. I'm blood walking.
Pow, right in the kisser.
This 762's flipping, I put him in a blender.
Pow, right in the kisser.
A bartender, I give him shots, now he look drunk like he on liquor.
Pow, right in the kisser.
Those are not Glocks, buddy, those are ghost guns.
Those ain't real.
Pow, right in the kisser.
My homie smoked too many ops, he don't got no lungs.
He ain't even got no lungs.
Pow, right in the kisser.
223 shells, nigga, that's for King Kong.
That's what the dick ass.
Pow, right in the kisser.
Go play that Roof Chris, bitch, that's my theme song.
We eat that Roof Chris every time we wax.
Pow, right in the kisser.
In this belly backpack is a big strap.
Some shit that really can't even fit in his back.
Pow, right in the kisser.
He got flip hollows, turned him to a Big Mac.
Turn his dumb ass to a burger or something.
Pow, right in the kisser.
Dead man, that's a homie you can't get back.
He's no longer, he can't come back.
Pow, right in the kisser.
Stripping every buster nigga at them kickbacks.
They have no chains on them.
Pow, right in the kisser.
Riding around the city with two straps, I feel like John Wick.
Pow, right in the kisser.
Caught in front of that stove, so I flicked him like a bit.
Like a lighter.
Pow, right in the kisser.
Bitches choosing sides cause they knowin' we the shit.
They them niggas, we got sticks.
Pow, right in the kisser.
But we don't give them shit, we just run them, then we dip.
We did.
Pow, right in the kisser.
Bro drive 50, so I had to place the order.
The order?
Pow, right in the kisser.
Chop his head off and throw his body across the border.
I flipped him like a quarter.
Pow, right in the kisser.
You was not a slaughter nigga, you the hood porter.
Those are the stones you think shit.
Pow, right in the kisser.
You could date the bitch if you got the feed to afford her.
You can't buy that bitch.
Pow, right in the kisser. He's never coming back in that stack. Pow, right in the kisser. I'ma shoot it till my hand cramp. Pow, right in the kisser. I ain't finna go in bareback, bitch. Pow, right in the kisser. You love me, then come let my friends crash. Pow, right in the kisser. I caught him lacking in his C class. Pow, right in the kisser. They gon' have to run a beat back. Pow, right in the kisser. You go against the team, you need cash. Pow, right in the kisser. I caught his mama at the repass. Pow, right in the kisser.
Another nigga dead, you gotta deal with it.
I mean, it's been a long ass time ago.
Pow, right in the kisser.
You an internet thug, I'm in the real trenches.
He just pop it on the ground, weird ass nigga.
Pow, right in the kisser.
He wanna squabble up, I wanna kill niggas.
I'ma hit him with this chop, we ain't gon' box.
Pow, right in the kisser.
I'm from the stink team and saw real niggas.
We run this shit, y'all weird.
Pow, right in the kisser.
I nutted her face and told her deal with it.
Splashed all on the motherfucker's face.
Pow, right in the kisser.
I was cooking in the county on the grill, nigga.
I was whipping up all type of fancy shit.
Pow, right in the kisser.
I was really in K-Town taking field trips.
The lean, May-Lean, Kim Wong and all.
Pow, right in the kisser.
All dome shot, we tryna split wigs.
He tryna rearrange some shit.
Pow, right in the kisser.
Man, niggas know what the fuck going on, nigga.
Pow, right in the kisser.
Man, he's never coming back in that stat, nigga. Man, let that shit go, bro. Like, this shit is ridiculous. Like, you niggas still holding on to grudges and all that shit from 3 years ago, man. Like,
Pow, right in the kisser.
I'm just saying, like, y'all niggas, like, it's come on, bro. Like,
Pow, right in the
like,
kisser.
it's over with, bro. Like, man, like, come on,
Pow,
bro.
right in the kisser.
He's never coming back in that stat. Like,
Pow, right in the kisser.
like, just face it, bro. Like, y'all just holding on to this shit, like, nigga.
Pow, right in the
What
kisser.
y'all gonna do? Wait till somebody else get flipped? Like, what's going on?
Pow, right in the kisser.
Yeah, exactly, nigga. Yeah.
Pow, right in the kisser. Pow, right in the kisser.
Pow right in the kisser. Pow
right in the kisser. Pow, right in the kisser. Right in the kisser.
Come on, bro.
Pow, right
He's
in
no
the kisser.
longer.
Pow, right in the kisser.
We Japanese still. You getting cooked in front of your family? Like a Japanese meal. It's Yashup the Hibachi, and none of you niggas can stop me, but can't help but watch me. As promised, we are going to finish and wrap up the West African Common Era History series. It's a book dealing with the empires of medieval West Africa, Ghana, Mali, and Songhai. We've already did 2 parts of it. Now let's finish the last part, dealing with society and culture, the Soninke people of the Ghana Empire, the money people of the Mali Empire, and the Songhai people. With that being said, let's get right into it, man. Why shoot the breeze about it when you can be about it? My degrees around it. So let's go straight. Let's get straight to it, man. Wrap this series up. All right, so part 2, society and culture, dealing with the Soninke people of the Ghana Empire. As you can see right here, that's I believe, what is this? Woman of the cattle herding Fula people who are among the populations of Ghana, Mali, and Songhai is wearing earrings of pure gold from the ancient mines of Mali. So here's a picture there. You know, to the brother that said we're all jungle peoples. And what were we doing in those forests? Were we foragers or were we farmers? That's a big thing too. When you did have brothers and sisters that were living in forest localities and whatnot. Chapter 4, the Soninke people of the Ghana Empire. The Soninke were one of the first communities that Muslim merchants traded with when they crossed the Sahara Desert and arrived in the Sahel. The Soninke called their kingdom Ouagadougou, but the Arab geographers who wrote about it called it Ghana. In 1067 and 1068, during the period of the Ghana Empire's greatest power and prosperity, the Arab scholar al-Bakri wrote a description of the Western Sudan, including a surprising number of details about the empire and its capital city. Of all the Arab geographers whose works have been translated into English by N. Lefsion and J.F.P. Hopkins in Corpus of Arabic Sources for West African History, al-Bakri provides the most information about Ghana. He lived in Cordoba, Spain, and never visited Africa himself, so he had to interview traders who had crossed the Sahara. Al-Bakri also based his writings on earlier written sources, including a geographical work by Muhammad ibn Yusuf al-Warraq, 904 to 973. Since he never saw the place he was writing about, it is understandable that he got some facts confused. For example, al-Bakri is one of the Arab geographers who thought the capital city and its word for king were both Ghana. He also reported that the king of Ghana, at the time he was writing, was named Tunkamanin, who took the throne in 1063. The Arab geographers apparently did not know that Tunka was the title for Ghana's rulers. Magan was another, which might be the origin of the term Ghana. Al-Bakri tells a story about Basi, Tunkamanin's uncle, that is similar to the story of Dinga in the legend of Ouagadougou. Basi was the king of Ghana before Tunkamanin. According to the story, Basi had become ruler at the age of 85. Toward the end of Basi's life, he became blind, but this was kept a secret from his subjects. When Basi had to meet the public, he was able to fool people with the help of his ministers, who would whisper to or otherwise verbally signal to him what he was supposed to do and say. A travel writer who stayed home. The Arab scholar al-Bakri was born in Spain early in the 11th century and died there in 1094. He never visited Africa and most likely never even left Spain during his lifetime. Nevertheless, he is one of the most important sources for early West African history below the Sahara, including most of what is known about the Ghana Empire. Al-Bakri got his information from books written by Arab geographers whose works are now lost. He also interviewed many people who had traveled across the Sahara. It is significant that the king before Tunkamanin was his uncle rather than his father. This is evidence of matrilineal line of descent in which the king's successor is the son of his sister. This was done because the ruling family and government could always be sure whose a boy's mother was, but a boy's father could never be established for certain. Oh, man. Animals and plants. Hunting was important to the Soninke people, but details about how they are sketchy because the Arab geographers had only a vague knowledge of the animals below the Sahara. Al-Bakri mentioned the animal from whose hide shields are made, quoted in Lepsion and Hopkins. But he did not know what it was. He did not recognize the hippopotamus, but heard about an animal that grazed on land, lived in the water, and resembled an elephant. And the great size of its body as well as its snouts and tusks. In medieval Ghana, the hippo was hunted with a javelin, a light spear that was thrown, that had rings in its handle and ropes that threw the rings. The hunters would throw several javelins at a hippo in the water. When it died and floated to the surface, they used the ropes to drag it to shore. One product made from the thick hippo hide was a vicious kind of whip that was exported for sale in distant markets. Many different kinds of trees grew in the savannah. One of these was ebony, which produces beautiful and valuable black hardwood. Although it was used for firewood by the local population, one of the most useful trees was a baobab, which the Arab writers agreed was a very strange one. They had some fantastic and false notions, believing that the baobab produced wool from which fireproof garments were made. Other aspects of baobab must have been seen as strange, but happened to be true. Ibn Battuta, who actually traveled through the Western Sudan from 1352 to 1353, correctly reported that even without leaves, the trunks are so big around that they can provide shade to many people. He saw one with a hollow trunk that was used as a weaver's studio. Connections. The amazing baobab tree. You see an image here, a depiction of that here, a baobab tree. Baobab trees provide food, medicine, and shelter. The baobab is one of the biggest and strangest trees in the world and one of the oldest living things in Africa. Some trees are more than 3,000 years old, and the largest measure more than 90 feet around. The baobab has been called the upside down tree because when its branches are bare of leaves, they look like roots sticking up in the air. And it has also been called the bottle tree because the thick, absorbent trunk can store hundreds of gallons of water. The baobab is sacred to at least one clan in Western Sudan. It is credited with saving the life of an ancestor who was dying of thirst before he reached one of the great trees. The baobab can continue to live when much of it has been hollowed out. And at various times and places, hollow ones have been used as people's homes, storehouses, workshops, and tombs. African village women still gather baobab leaves to mash and boil for use in cooking sauces. For medicinal purposes, baobab leaves are pounded and pulped or dried in powder to treat a variety of problems, including breathing and intestinal disorders, fever, and insect bites. When the bark is stripped off a baobab, it simply grows more bark so it can be used without killing the tree. The bark is pounded into fiber that is used for making baskets, mats, rope, paper, and bark cloth. The fruit of the baobab is large, fuzzy pod that looks like a small green football. It is called monkey bread because it is the favorite food of monkeys among other animals. There's a white pulp inside the pods from which cream of tartar using in baking is made. The pulp is also mashed and mixed with water to make a tasty drink. The seeds are full of vegetable oil and can be grilled and eaten. The shells of the pods are dried and made into bowls. The city plan of Ghana's capital. There's a good deal of confusion and doubt in identifying the ruins of Ghana's capital. In the Soninke oral tradition, the city associated with the hero Diaby Sise in the guardian spirit Bida is called Kumbi. The Arab geographer al-Bakri does not mention the name Kumbi. He and other Arab writers call both the city and its king Ghana in the region Akwar. Al-Bakri said the capital had wells with good drinking water and water for cultivating vegetables. The travelers he spoke to led him to believe that the city was made up of two towns, a Muslim town and a king's town, before sub-Saharan population became almost entirely Muslim. It was not unusual for Muslims to have their own neighborhood with their mosque, special food shops, and other necessities. It is surprising, though, that al-Bakri claims that the two towns were 6 miles apart. None of the ruins throughout the Sahel have revealed an urban center that had separate towns 6 miles apart. Looking for a likely place to dig for the capital, archaeologists chose a place known to local Soninke people as Kumbi Saleh. It is about 20 miles north of the border that southern Mauritania shares with Western Mali. This site revealed an urban center that had two sections, although they were not 6 miles apart. There are also others in which al-Bakri description is not the same as what archaeologists found at Kumbi Saleh. Some archaeologists and other scholars believe the site is the Kumbi of Sunniki oral tradition and the capital described by al-Bakri, but others are not so sure. An intensive search around the stone ruins of the site has failed to clearly reveal either the royal quarter or the king's tomb that al-Bakri described. There is no river anywhere near the site, even though some scholars argue that Ghana's capital was near water because the Arab geographer al-Idrisi 1099 to 1166 said that the city of Ghana consisted of two towns and on the opposite banks of a river. The ruins known today as Kumbi Saleh revealed that it was a large town that covered about 1 square mile. Some of its features do resemble al-Bakri's descriptions. Al-Bakri said the houses were made of stone and acacia wood, and that is what archaeologists have found in the ruins of rectangular buildings in Kumbi Saleh. The larger buildings of stone include mosques in the residences of wealthy Arab traders. In the ruins called Kumbi Saleh, the northeastern part of the town was built of stone and had large buildings. Some of them 2 stories high. This appears to have been the neighborhood occupied by wealthy merchants from North Africa. In the southern section of the town, there are some stone buildings, but the evidence indicates that most were made of mud brick called banco. It is similar to adobe in the American Southwest. This part of the ruins comes the closest to looking something like the king's town described by al-Bakri. What happened to Bida? What about the sacred serpent Bida from the legend of Wagadu? Somewhere in the land of the Sunniki during the time of al-Bakri was writing, they still had shrines with live snakes. Al-Bakri heard about a snake shrine of people he called Safku, who were probably the people of the Diafonu. They lived some distance from Ghana's capital city, but were probably Sunniki. According to what al-Bakri heard, the snake was a monstrous serpent with a mane and a tail and a head shaped like that of a Bactrian camel. The snake he described is partly the product of some travelers' wild imagination, but the general ritual at the cave is clearly similar to the one described in the legend of Wagadu. The snake lived in a cave, and just outside it lived the priests who handled its feeding and supervised the rituals and ceremonies. Al-Bakri wrote, when one of their rulers dies, they assemble all those whom they regard as worthy of kingship, bring them to the cave, and pronounce known formulas. Then the snake approaches them and smells one man after another until it prods one with its nose. As soon as it has done this, it turns away towards the cave. The one prodded follows as fast as he can and pulls from its tail or its mane as many hairs as he is able. His kingship will last as many years as he has hairs, 1 hair per year. Obviously, some of the Arab geographers were prepared to believe anything they heard about the strange things to be found in the land below the Sahara. One would think that even writing from far away in Spain, al-Bakri would know that snakes do not have hair. Nevertheless, this story indicates that hundreds of years after the founding of Wagadu, great pythons like Bida were still important religious symbols of Sunniki society. It also makes it clear that many populations of the Western Sudan had still not converted to Islam. The short roof beams. The buildings of Kumbi Saleh have a special architectural feature that is not seen in parts of the world where there are tall trees. In medieval times in the Sahel region, the acacia tree used for roof beams were not long enough or sturdy enough to go across wide spaces. To build a roof with short beams, wide stone pillars were built up from the ground and spaced about 8 to 12 feet apart. Then the acacia logs were laid from the tops of the walls to the pillars, and the upper floor could be laid on these. This kind of architecture is found in all the ruined cities of the region, including Kumbi Saleh, Aguadas, now called Tegados, Walata, a great trading city, Tijikia, where copper was mined in the Sahara, and others that flourished during the Ghana Empire. In the central neighborhoods of the town, the houses were built close together with narrow streets. There was also open spaces with large sunken areas that were created when earth was dug out to make mud bricks for construction. These low areas filled up during the rainy season. Although the water was not good to drink, it was convenient for watering livestock and market gardens and for doing laundry. After the rainy season, these temporary ponds gradually dried up. Maps made by archaeologists show one main avenue running from east to west through the center of Kumbi Saleh. On both sides of the avenue were open spaces, probably for market stalls that would have been busy with regional trade when Ghana was at its most prosperous. At its widest point, the avenue spanned 39 feet. This was at the center of the southern part of the town, in front of what appears to have been the main mosque. The archaeologists found that the mosque itself was about 150 feet from west to east and about 75 feet from north to south. The western half of the mosque appears to have been an open paved courtyard, which is the usual design of mosques in the Sahel and Western Sudan. At Friday prayers, when the building filled up with worshipers, the courtyard would handle the people who could not fit inside. Unfortunately, there is no way to know if this is actually the Mosque of al-Bakri, because as the one built for the Muslims who visited the king's court. In fact, archaeologists cannot even be certain that Kumbi Saleh is the town he described. Kumbi Saleh had at least two large cemeteries. Archaeologists have used them to estimate the city's population. They think the town had 15,000 to 20,000 inhabitants. There were 53 stones in the cemeteries that were inscribed with verses from the Quran in Arabic, and 24 of the stones inscribed with ornamental decorations. When the archaeologists excavated in the cemeteries, they found iron objects including knives, spearheads, nails, farming tools, and a pair of scissors. They also discovered some tiny glass weights of the type used for weighing gold. There were many fragments of pottery as well, including some that came from the Mediterranean coast. All of this archaeological evidence suggests that the Kumbi Saleh was once a prosperous commercial center, but it does not prove it is Kumbi mentioned in Sunniki oral tradition or the town described by al-Bakri. Al-Haji Abdo Bayero, emir of Kano in 1965, that's the image you've seen above. In 1515, Askia Muhammad the Greek conquered Kano. Here, the emir is escorted by modern police in blue uniforms and royal bodyguards, Dogari, in traditional red and green gowns. On horseback under an ornate sunshade topped by a golden symbol, the richly dressed emir resembles descriptions of some medieval West African rulers. The King's Palace. The King's Palace, described by al-Bakri, was similar to royal residence that still exists in sub-Saharan Africa, West Africa. These are not large single buildings with hundreds of rooms like some grand palaces in Europe. Al-Bakri said the king had a palace and a number of dwellings with domes on top. They were surrounded with an enclosure like a city wall, but actually the entire collection of buildings within the wall, including the king's private residence, would have been considered the palace. The biggest and most impressive building was for the king. He was the head of a very large family with many wives and concubines, scores of children, and dozens of relatives. Some buildings would be for individual wives, each with her children, relatives, servants, and slaves. There would be quarters for guests, palace guards, messengers, other servants, and slaves. There would also be granaries, buildings where grain was stored, stables, toilet, and bath enclosures, places to cook in wet weather, otherwise they cooked outside, and other storage and utility buildings. Lost in translation. It is important to remember that Arab informants and writers describing North Africa were translating everything they heard into Arabic. Translation requires making vocabulary choices, and some of the words they chose are probably inaccurate and misleading. Clearly, there was some confusion about the word Ghana. Also, dome buildings probably refer to small circular mud brick houses with cone-shaped thatched roofs made from bundles of straw, that since ancient times has served as special huts and individual residents in Western Sudan. Before Islam came to Ghana, the Ghana Empire, the king practiced only the traditional Sunniki religion. He would have had a shrine, a holy place for personal spiritual objects. After the kings became Muslims, probably toward the end of the 11th century, there would be a small mosque for him and any other Muslims who lived in or visited the royal compound. All of this would be inside the royal walls and would be considered the palace, the royal court. Objects found in cemetery excavations show that Ghana had a thriving, prosperous economy. The way al-Bakri described the splendid royal court of Tunka Manin fits nicely with that evidence. However, his description of the clothing is probably flawed. He said only the king and his designated successor were allowed to wear sewn clothes, and that seems unlikely. Historians are not sure what he meant by sewn clothes. In any case, al-Bakri mentioned a variety of textiles available for clothing, including silk, brocade, and cotton, depending on what the wearer could afford. He said the men shaved their beards and the women shaved their heads. The king wore many necklaces and bracelets. This is similar to the way some West African kings still dress on ceremonial occasions. Again and again, Arab writers describe the custom of people sprinkling dust on their heads in the medieval West African empires. It seems to have been an expression of humility and respect and was required of people when they were in the king's presence. Muslims were not required to do this because they believed that in Islam, people bow only to God and never to another man. A golden economy. According to al-Bakri, the king was assisted in administering his empire by a council of ministers and officers of the court. One of the most important government functions involved collecting a kind of customs tax called tariffs on the goods that went in and out the empire. This was one of the main sources of revenue for the imperial treasury and helped account for Ghana's prosperity and reputation as the land of gold. During the time that al-Bakri sources were in Ghana, a tariff of 1 golden dinar had to be paid for every donkey load of salt that entered the country, and 2 dinars were charged for the same load leaving the country. A tariff of 5 mikwals was charged for a load of copper, and there were other kinds of goods that were charged 10 mikwals per load. In their own words, gold dog collars. Al-Bakri wrote that Tunka Manin wore a high cap decorated with gold and wrapped in a turban of fine cotton, and went on to describe the scene at the royal court of Ghana as altogether splendid. The king sits in audience or to hear grievances against officials in a domed pavilion around which 10 horses covered with gold embroidered materials. Behind the king stand 10 pages holding shields and swords decorated with gold, and on his right are the sons of the lesser kings of his country wearing splendid garments and their hair plaited, braided with gold. The governor of the city sits on the ground before the king, and around him are ministers seated. Likewise, at the door of the pavilion are dogs of excellent pedigree who hardly ever leave the place where the king is, guarding him. Around their necks they wear collars of gold and silver studded with a number of balls of the same metal. The audience is announced by the beating of the drum, which they call duba, made from a long hollow log. When the people who profess the same religion as the king approach him, they fall on their knees and sprinkle dust on their heads. Well, this is their way of greeting him. As for the Muslims, they greet him only by clapping their hands. All gold nuggets found in the mines controlled by Ghana were reserved for the king. Al-Bakri heard that the nuggets weighed anywhere from an ounce to a pound. Ordinary people were only allowed to deal in gold dust because otherwise they would accumulate so much gold that it would lose its value. Al-Bakri was not writing until about 1067, so his informant's observations were made rather late in the empire's history. Arab scholars were always fascinated by stories of gold from the lands of the Sudan and had already been talking about the wealth of the kings of Ghana for well over a century. In 889 to 890, Al-Yaqubi published a description of the powerful kingdom of Ghana in which he said gold was found all over the country. Ibn Hakwal, writing between 967 and 988, said the ruler of Ghana was the wealthiest king on the face of the earth because of his treasure and stocks of gold. Nearly 100 years after al-Bakri, stories like these, sometimes no doubt exaggerated, were still coming from Arab geographers. Al-Idrisi, writing in 1154, described a natural gold nugget in the king's palace so big that the reins of the king's horse were tied to it. Military power and justice. The government was backed by a large, powerful army. Although the reported size of the army is probably exaggerated, it is said that the king of Ghana could put 200,000 soldiers into the field. Of these, 40,000 were archers, and some of the troops rode small horses. The archers of the province of Sama were especially skillful, and they used poison arrows. Other weapons included swords, long spears, and short javelins that were thrown. Al-Idrisi was impressed by the righteousness of Ghana's leader, who by that time had become a Muslim. Al-Idrisi described a daily procession, a kind of formal parade to uphold justice, in which the king and his army commanders went on horseback every morning through the streets of the town. Anyone who has suffered injustice or misfortune confronts him and stays there until the wrong is remedied. In their own words, justice and punishment. Al-Bakri describes a truth-telling ritual that was used to judge whether someone was guilty of a crime. These rituals require people to undergo an unpleasant or even dangerous experience. Different types of these rituals are described in various oral traditions, so they seem to have been fairly common in the medieval societies of Western Sudan, just as they were in Europe during the same historical period. In this case, it was trial by water. When a man is accused of denying a debt or having shed blood or some other crime, the officials in charge takes a thin piece of wood which is sour and bitter to taste, and pours upon it some water, which he then gives to the defendant to drink. If the man vomits, his innocence is recognized, and he is congratulated. he does not vomit and the drink remains in his stomach, the accusation is accepted as justified. Oh, wow. Anyway, al-Bakri also described how some serious crimes are punished. He wrote that the Sudan blacks of Ghana observe the law that a person who falls victim to a thief may either sell or kill him as he chooses. As for people who cheat on their wife, the law is that he should be flayed, skinned alive. Personal drummers marched in front of the army commanders. These drums were beaten as the commanders rode to the palace each morning to meet the king for the daily procession. As each commander arrived at the palace gate, his drum was silenced. 400 years later, during the Askia dynasty of Songhai, the highest-ranking army commanders had the same custom and were called drum lords. Islam in the capital city. Much of the information in al-Bakri's description of Ghana's capital involves matter of religion. He was a Muslim himself, so naturally, he was very interested in how Muslims were treated in Ghana. He said there were a dozen of mosques in the Muslim town with a main one for Friday prayer. This is still the arrangement in Islamic cities today, where everyone goes to pray together at the Friday mosque. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the mosque had imams, prayer leaders, who collected regular salaries, and there were individuals called muezzins who would climb the minaret mosque tower to call the people to prayer. The Muslim town also had jurists and scholars who were authorities on Muslim law, the Quran, and other religious matters. In the other town at King's Court, his interpreters, his treasurer, and most of his ministers were Muslims. Near the Court of Justice, there was a mosque for the convenience of Muslim officials and visitors. Sunniki traditional religion. The name of the king's town, which in Arabic was Al-Ghaba, was associated with traditional Sunniki religion, not Islam. In Arabic, Al-Ghaba means the forest, and this might refer to the sacred grove in the traditional religions of societies throughout sub-Saharan West Africa. The special location for communicating with the spirit world was a grove of trees outside the village or town. Most of the sacred groves are gone now, but some still exist in remote areas. In the days of great medieval empires of Western Sudan, practically every community had a sacred grove, whether or not there were Muslims living there. Al-Bakri said only the priests were allowed to enter this sacred grove. This is consistent with what is known from more recent times. Mystery and secrecy are very important in traditional religion, and some of the sacred ritual objects are not supposed to be seen by ordinary people. Others are seen only by people who are members of the special societies. It's believed that terrible consequences can be suffered by people who violate these rules. It says in their words, the king's tomb. Although al-Bakri said no one was allowed to see the king's burial in tomb, he heard some details about it. When their king dies, they construct over the place where his tomb will be an enormous dome of sagewood. Then they bring him on a bed covered with a few carpets and cushions and place him inside the dome. At his side, they place his ornaments, his weapons, and the vessels from which he used to eat and drink. Filled with various kinds of food and beverages, they placed there too the men who used to serve his meals. They closed the door at the dome and covered it with mats and furnishings. Then the people assembled who heaped earth upon it until it becomes like a big hill and dig a ditch around it until the mound can be reached at only one place. Wow, so that's similar. This is me speaking, not the book. That's similar to the ancient Egyptians burying servants with them. It's almost as if they think that the servants are going to go into the afterlife with them and continue to serve them. And they bring their favorite meals because they think they're going to eat the same thing they eat on earth in the afterlife. That's very similar to ancient Egyptian belief. It says here, this form of royal burial is sometimes considered to be evidence that the people believed their kings were also gods. Excavations at 2 mounds in the inland delta region of the Niger River reveals tombs with burial rooms. In each grave, there were 2 human skeletons with weapons, ornaments, and beads. The tomb also contained other human skeletons and animal bones. Al-Bakri mentioned that people were sometimes imprisoned in the sacred grove and never heard from again. This way of doing away with with criminals would aid frightening power and mystery to the rules associated with the sacred site. Contributing to the mystery of the sacred grove and the spiritual practices centered there was the practice of locating the king's tomb within the mysterious circle of trees. Much of what is known about the traditional religions in sub-Saharan Africa was written by Muslim Arabs and later Christian Europeans. Their descriptions reflected the prejudices of foreigners toward a traditional religion they did not understand, took care to learn anything about. Al-Bakri dismissed the Sunnite traditional system of belief in Ghana with the remark that their religion is paganism and the worship of idols. He introduced his description of Sunnite spirituality by referring to the sorcerers of these people, men in charge of the religious cult. In fact, it was Sunnite traditional spiritual leaders or priests who presided over the polytheistic belief in more than one God religion. The traditional priests of the Sunnite and other Mende people have usually been blacksmiths. They knew the secrets of how to use fire to turn raw iron ore into tools and weapons that were essential for daily life, a process that was associated with magic. It was through their perceived special abilities to communicate with the spirit world that the traditional priests became guardians of the sacred grove and the religious objects stored there, secret sites. Burial sites similar to those of the Ghana Empire have been found among another Mende group, the Mandinka of Gambia. In Gambia, the king was buried in his own home together with his weapons. His senior wife and members of his court were also buried there. The tomb was then closed and a big mound of earth was heaped over the tomb to the height of a house. At other times and places in Mende history, burial sites of rulers were sometimes hidden so well that nobody could ever find them again. Some sources refer to royal burials in dry riverbeds, where the grave would be covered by water during the rainy season. One reason of this custom is that it was believed evildoers could create dangerous sorcery tools by retrieving something from a ruler's grave. Even today, it is possible to see monuments in the Republic of Mali that are said to be the tombs of famous kings, except the kings were never really buried there, and nobody knows the true location of their graves. Muslim writers refer to the religious objects stored in the groves as idols, which is a word choice that suggests that there's something less than respectable about them. Some religious objects in Sunnite traditional religion do look intimidating and dangerous because they are meant to cause fear and respect when seen, but there are also many masks and small statue of wood, terracotta, and other materials that are beautiful. The most important of the traditional religious objects were and still are representations of various gods and spirits. The objects were not worshipped as idols, though. Masks were worn by dancers and musical rituals as a way of communicating with spirits they represent, and to include those spirits in community affairs. Small statues served a similar purpose when they were given ritual offerings such as kola nuts, degi, sweet millet, balls of porridge, and the blood of sacrificed chickens. Many of these religious objects included various types of masks and statuettes are now regarded as fine works of art. They can be found in important museums in Europe and the United States. And I believe there's a mask here of what we just read, some of these ritualistic masks. Priests often kept spiritual objects such as this mask from the Ntomo society of the Bamana people in sacred groves. Ntomo masks could have had between 2 and 8 horns. Although this mask originally had 6 horns, only 2 remain after generations of use. And here's another image. It looks like a priest here. Professional speakers and musicians known as Jalu remain a key part of Mende society today, as they did in medieval times. They tell stories that preserve memories of their ancestors and their deeds. Sanasi Kuyate died in 1995, is seen here with the staff of office, as you guys can see there. Chapter 5, the Mende people of the Mali Empire. The Mende people descended from the inhabitants of the Mali Empire. Let me pull this brand up real quick. Hold on. There we go. Fair use. We're doing this for scholarship and research purposes. The Mende people descended from the inhabitants of the Mali Empire. Since there are no written records from that time, it is difficult for modern historians to understand the social system that existed then. There is, however, an extensive oral history and a tradition of stories that has been gathered from modern Mende people. From these stories, certain assumptions can be made about what the oral historians thought life was like. But historians cannot be sure exactly when particular details became part of the oral history. This is a topic of ongoing debate. For example, there's a good deal of evidence that the bards, poets who recite a story associated with a particular oral tradition were active at the royal court of Mali, just as they were elsewhere in Africa in the 19th century. The same can be said of blacksmiths, but in the cases of other occupational groups, the evidence is scarcer. There's also a chronicle from the Arab historian Ibn Battuta, who visited the Mali Empire in 1352 to 1353 and described Mansa Suleiman's court. His description is perhaps the only eyewitness account of society in the 14th century, but his record is incomplete. For example, Ibn Battuta mentions hearing the music of string instruments, but he does not say which ones. Monday social organization. Today's Monday people have an extremely rich history and tradition. The high point of the history was the Mali Empire. The social status of the most ancient families is based on their identification with ancestors who participated in the founding of the empire early in the 13th century. Members of some of these families have the status of aristocrat or Horon. In their own words, Grand King, receivers, dusty visitors. Arab traveler Ibn Battuta has provided an eyewitness description of the 14th century Mali Empire. In 1325, Ibn Battuta left home in Tangier, Morocco, and set out for the pilgrimage to Mecca. He traveled the Muslim world for 24 years, and in 1352-1353 crossed the Sahara and visited the court of Mansa Suleiman. On some days, the Mansa sit on a platform under a tree. It is upholstered with silk cushions are placed upon it, and a sunshade is erected. This is like a dome of silk topped by a golden bird the size of a falcon. The Mansa comes out of a door in the corner of the palace with his bow in his hand and his quiver of arrows over his shoulder. On his head, he wears a bonnet of gold fastened with golden strap. The singers come out in front of him with gold and silver string instruments in their hands, and they are followed by about 300 armed slaves. The Mansa walks slowly, look at the people, then he mounts the platform. As he sits down, the drums are beaten and the trumpets are sounded. The blacks are the humblest of people in front of their Mansa and are very submissive towards him. They greet him by saying Mansa Suleiman Ki. When he calls to one of them at his sessions in the pavilion, the person takes off his regular clothes and puts on ragged ones and removes his turban and puts on a dirty old hat and goes in pulling up his trousers to expose his legs. Only uncircumcised boys wear shorts, and goes towards with great humility. Then he beats on the ground with his elbows. If one of them speaks to the Mansa and the Mansa answers him, he uncovers his back and sprinkles dust on his head and back as if he were washing himself with water. Traditionally, these aristocrats were landowners and community leaders. They were expected to conduct themselves with dignity and honor and to speak only when they had something serious to say. The senior male members of families who traced their ancestors to the village's founders were eligible to be chiefs. Some families claim to be descended from distinguished ancestors described in the Sunhata epic, the story of Mali's founding, including Sunhata himself. Enterprising merchants whose business was greatly aided by their ability to speak many languages were constantly on the move between village and urban market centers and from Malian markets across the Sahara to North African destinations. There were entire fishing and hunting communities who spoke different languages than their neighbors. The same was true of slaves acquired through wars of expansion and from raids beyond the borders of the empire. More than a dozen languages would have been spoken in the far-flung territories of the Mali Empire. Other cultural influences. While the Mali Empire was based on Mande culture, there were scores of other cultural groups who lived in and contributed to the greatness of the Mali Empire. The camel-riding Berber groups of the Sahara, including the Tuareg and Sahaja, were in control of the desert transportation and commerce and were always competitors for control of the salt mines. Fula herders, following their cattle and other livestock on seasonal migrations, and competed with farmers for the most productive lands. Farmer communities of many different cultures across the empire produced several kinds of grains, rice, and vegetables for distribution to urban centers. One Mande group is identified by its association with Islam. This includes Muslim clerics, religious leaders who are specialists in Islamic studies or leaders of prayer at the mosque. Their Arabic title, Imam, has become Al-Mami, in the Mandi languages. Some of these Muslim clerics are teachers in Quran schools where children study the Holy Book of Islam and are expected to memorize at least part of it in Arabic. Some groups of craft specialists in Mandi society have their own special status. Blacksmiths produce iron and forge it into farming tools, household items, and weapons that are essential to the community. Leather workers tan and dye animal hides and turn them into sandals, pouches, cushions, saddles, and other leather goods. The bards or jelly are genealogists, people who keep track of families' history, musicians, praise singers, spokespersons, diplomats, and oral historians. A smaller group of bards called Funu, or Finalu specialize in reciting Islamic texts. These specialized groups are born into their occupations. Their families have been practicing the same craft for many years, passing their knowledge and skills from generation to generation. The occupational specialists are collectively known as Nayama Kalal. This term recognizes them as having special skills that are essential to the success and well-being of the village community. Traditional members of the Nayama Kala class only marry people who are involved in the same occupation. This helps to preserve the secrets of their craft. In the case of the blacksmiths, for example, in each village there is a limited amount of work for them, and people who have ancient claims to the occupation want to be sure there is not too much competition. Marrying people who already have the same knowledge and skills is a way of protecting the extended family's livelihood. There are other occupations within the Nyamakala class. Some are determined by gender, others by craft specialization. For example, village potters are usually the wives of blacksmiths. While their husbands use fire to turn iron-rich rock into tools, the women do the same thing to fire natural clay into pottery. In their own words, kings of the Sunjata's world. West Africans tell their story in a different way than the Arab historians. The great Jelly, Dijanka Tasi Konde, died in 1997, lived his entire life in the small villages of Fadama near the Niandan River in northeastern Guinea. This region was once part of the Mali Empire. Tasi was a member of the Malinka people. He identified himself by the name of his mother, Dijanka, just as Suhana was identified by his mother's name. Tasi's father, Babu Kande, died in 1964, was one of the most famous Jeli of the colonial era, when both Guinea and Mali were part of French West Africa. Babu was descended from a line of Kande bards who traced their ancestry to people who lived in the time of Suhata, early in the 13th centuries, when the Mali Empire was founded. Like all of the most knowledgeable bards who have amazing memories, Tasi could not read or write, but from his father he gained a vast knowledge of oral tradition. This is the history of Mali Empire. It took them 6 sections of 5 to 6 hours each to narrate the text from which the excerpt is selected. The word Namu after each of Tasi's lines is spoken by an assistant who encourages the speaker by saying, Namu, we hear you, or that's right. The 7 Mandi kings who ruled Mandan, Namu. The first of those kings was Kande's ancestor, Dansamogo Diara. He fought to gain a Mandi kingship. He loved Mandan. He built Mandan. Those of you who say you are Kande, you have power. The next in leadership of the Mandan was the Kulubali's ancestor, Kani Simon. Kani Simon ruled Mandan and made it prosperous. He improved Mandan without going to war. You cannot point to anyone who fought against Kulubali. He ruled and was able to improve Mandan. To the end of his reign, he never fought with anyone. The next to that was the Kamara ancestor, Taban Wanafaran Kamara of Sibi Mountain. That is the Kamahan, the Kamahan you were talking about. You heard it. How did well with Mandan and made it prosper. He did well with Mandan and made it prosper. Anyone who rebelled against his rule, they will be captured and brought back into line. He was never captured or defeated in a war. If you are narrating a history, tell it the way it happened, from the time my eyes were first opened up to now. None of our elders have ever told us that these people were captured by any battle commander. The next to that is the ancestor of Danaba, Tinin Mansa Konkon Karina. He descended from the Kamasoko. He also did well with Mandan. From the beginning to the end of his reign, he was the walking stick that Mandan learned on. Namu. All those, this is a very long account, ain't it? Hold on real quick. It says here, all those that I have just counted, no battle commander ever captured them. Anyone who rebelled against these people after they made their laws that brought progress to the Mundan, after they united so they could combine the strength of all those kings. When it was time for one of them to rule, the seven regions world unite. They would help the seven regions would unite. They would help him with his kingship up to the end of his reign. But for war to break out, it was because of the Susu Sumanguru. Susu Sumanguru was the sixth Mansa of Mandan. The seventh Mansa was Mayan Suhata. Suhata's father, Magan Kamfara, was the Mansa. After the reigns of all those other people, it is God who chooses from among the people. New in the meeting that took place. Now in the meeting that took place, the country was put in the care of Magan Kamfara. This is about how Suhata was born. Blacksmiths are usually wood carvers as well as iron workers. They carve handles for iron tools and sculpt masks and small statues for ceremonial rituals. Some blacksmiths become goldsmiths who specialize in turning the gold of Monday into beautiful bracelets, necklaces, earrings, and other ornaments that are sold according to their weight. Other blacksmiths specialize in brick making and building construction. The Bards of Monday. Bards throughout the Western Sudan from the Atlantic coast to beyond the Niger Band are popularly known by the term griot or griot. But in Monday culture, they are called Jeli or Jelu. The singular is Jeli. They are the artists responsible for maintaining the lively oral tradition that recalls the deeds of the early ancestors. Their storytelling keeps these ancestors and their actions alive in the community's collective memory. As the main narrators of oral tradition, the Jeli have been responsible for preserving stories that express what the Monday people believe happened in the distant past. Stories of the ancestors passed from one generation of Jeli to the next. Down through the centuries, the Monday aristocratic families framed their own identities by recounting how they descended from the ancestors described in these stories. As specialists in maintaining the oral history of their culture, the Jeli are known to their own people as guardians of the word. The spoken word is believed to carry great power that can be a force of good or evil. In early Jeli served as the spokespersons of chiefs and kings, and were therefore responsible for the reputation of the king had in the community. Generations of Jeli families were permanently attached to leading households and ruling dynasties. The rulers provided them with everything required to support their families in exchange for their services and verbal arts. The Jeli fulfilled these responsibilities with praise, songs, and narratives describing the great deeds of the leaders' ancestors. As advisors to distinguished people, the Jeli encouraged these leaders to achieve high goals by reminding them of the examples set by their heroic ancestors. The Jeli would point out mistakes through the use of proverbs and advise the leaders to do better when they threatened to fail in their duties. The Jeli owned security dependent on their rulers' political power and social prestige. As a result, the stories they told tended to be biased on favor of their employers' ancestors at the expense of their rivals and enemies. The Dugha, the chief Jeli of Mansa, Suleiman's court. The best description of a Jeli from the medieval period comes from Ibn Battuta, an Arab historian who visited the Mali Empire in 1352 to 1353 and described his court standing ready to address the people whatever the monster wished to communicate was Dugha, his chief spokesman. As chief of the Jeli, Dugha was one of the best dressed people of the Mali court. He wore a turban, fine garments of silk brocade, and boots with spurs. From his waist hung a sword in a golden sheath, and he carried two short lances, one of gold and the other of silver with iron tips. Anybody who wanted to address Monster Suleiman had to speak to Dugha, who would pass on the message. Connection, the Monday Bala. The bala is a traditional Monday instrument and often played during the sacred rituals of celebration. There's an illustration above showing you that there. It looks like a xylophone. It says here, one of the most famous musical instruments in Monday culture is the bala. It has a bamboo frame bound together by strips of leather. Dried rosewood slabs are fastened to the frame by cords. The number of slabs on the bala ranges from 11 to 20, with 19 being the most common. Each slab is a different length, thus producing different tones when struck by the player's mallets, which are tipped with rubber or latex tape from wild trees. Fastened beneath each slab is a small gourd that acts as a resonator. The gourd has two small holes in its side that are covered with a thin membrane made from spider web or tissue paper. When the slabs are struck, air passes through the gourds and makes the membrane vibrate. While Ibn Battuta was in Mali, he attended the celebration that follows Ramadan, the Muslim holy month of fasting. Dugha was the main performer. During the 2-day festival, the Mansa would come out and take his place on his raised throne. The usual bodyguard was present with his ceremonial sword and lances. On the day described by Ibn Battuta, Dugha came out with his 4 wives and about 100 young women dressed in fine clothes and wearing gold headbands decorated with silver and gold ornaments. Seated at the center of everything, Dugha performed just as Jelly do today. He played the bala, a kind of xylophone, and sang praise songs that commemorated the monster's military campaigns and praised his ancestors from the time of Suhata. The women, a female Jelly, is a Jelly Muso, sang a chorus and strummed on a single string harp. There were 30 boys playing drums while others performed as acrobats and twirled swords. At the end of Dugha's performance, he was handed a purse from the Mansa with a public announcement that it contained 200 mithqals of gold dust. The other court officers also rewarded Dugha with the amounts appropriate to their rank. Even today, when anyone hears a Jelly praising their ancestors, they are expected to give him money. Stringed instruments. When Ibn Battuta mentioned seeing string instruments at the Mali royal court, he gave no details. So there's no way of knowing which ones he actually saw. Several of the Mandi string instruments are types of calabash harp. Calabashes are the dried shells of gourds. In Mandi society, in addition to being used as containers of all sizes, they serve as resonators for various kinds of musical instruments. Used in a harp, the calabash is like the body of the mandolin, but the sound hole is on the side. The resonator has a long bamboo neck that is usually spiked all the way through the calabash. It holds anywhere from 3 to 21 strings, depending on the type of harp. Many of the large harps have a buzzing leaf attached to the top of the neck. The buzzing leaf is a curved rectangle of tin with a V-shaped piece cut out of the front side and tiny metal rings inserted through holes around the sides. When the instrument is played, the leaf vibrates and creates a buzzing sound to accompany the music. 2 kinds of large deep tone harps, slightly curved necks, are played to accompany praise songs for hunters. The sembi has 7 strings and is tuned to the heptatonic scale, a scale within 7 tones as opposed to the 8-tone scale used in Western music. The donzo ngoni, donzo means hunter and ngoni means harp, has 6 strings and is tuned to a pentatonic scale, a scale with 5 tones. A slightly smaller version of the donzo ngoni and the kamala ngoni is played by young men at youth gatherings of all kinds, including weddings. The balone is larger and more deeply toned than the hunter's harps. It was traditionally played to send soldiers into battle and to praise them after victorious campaigns. The balone appears to be the oldest style among existing Mandi harps. It has only 3 or 4 strings and a neck that is curved like the bow of a hunter or warrior. And here's a illustration of that. You can see the image here of one of those stringed instruments. This large calabash harp called a balone has a neck curved like a hunter's bow, and music praising successful hunters is played on it. The tradition of playing harps may have started in antiquity with men returning from the hunt or battle, plucking the strings on their bows and singing about their accomplishments. This could be why the hunters and warriors' harps and music are not part of what the jelly does. There are no social restrictions regarding who plays harps, although hunters praise singers are often blacksmiths, possibly because they usually make the instruments. There are 2 Mandi string instruments that are not harps. One of them is called the dan in some regions and the kaworo in others. It has been a calabash resonator, but it's unlike the other string calabash instruments played by the Mandi musicians. There's an individual neck of each string. The 6 necks are flat, flexible sticks spiked right through one side of the calabash and out the other. At the top of each neck, a string is attached that extends down across the curved surface of the calabash and over a small cylinder bridge. Unlike the Mandi harps, the opening of the calabash resonator is not covered by animal skin, and the open side faces away from the musician. Connections. Musicians today. Dozens of Monday musicians from Mali and Guinea are internationally famous recording stars. Some are from the Jelly families, although many are not. Among the most famous male musicians from Mali is Salif Keita, who is believed to be the descendant of Suhata. He started his career with the rail band Tomani Dibati's 1989 record Kara, which made history as the first solo album featuring the Kora. Among more than a dozen world famous Mali female singers are the Almo Sangari, who first gained fame in 1989 with lyrics about women's social issues in her album Masolu, and Rokia Traore, who has a reputation as a musical rebel. Other top female singers of Mali include Kandia Koyate, Amikoita, Madamba, and Hawa Diarra. Maury Conti is among the most famous musicians from Guinea. He started playing the bala and later learned both guitar and kora currently. The number one recording star in Guinea is the Jelly Sekoba Bambino Diabate. He started his career with the Bombay Jazz, and his third solo album is Sneakin' Words of Tomorrow. Large music stores in the United States sell the CDs of all these Monday recording stars and many more. The other string instrument that is not a harp also does not have a calabash resonator. The Nikoni or Ngoni is a kind of plucked guitar along with the bala and kora. It is the third of the Monday musical instruments that is traditionally played only by the jelly. The Nikoni's resonator is made of wood hollowed out like a miniature canoe. Stretched over the hollow is an animal hide with a sound hole in the center. It has a wooden neck and 3 to 7 strings. Slavery in the Monday society. From ancient times to the middle of the 19th century, one of the biggest groups within Monday society was slaves. In a great medieval state like the Mali Empire, many slaves were captured during the wars of expansion. Slaves were an extremely important part of the economy because their labor had great value. They also brought in wealth when they were sold across. Let me add this as a bookmark because I'm gonna have to remind y'all this because y'all think slavery started with the involvement of Europeans. As we see, West Africans already dealing with that. Anyway, it says here, slaves were an extremely important part of the economy because their labor had great value. They also brought in wealth when they were sold across the trans-Saharan slave routes. When soldiers returned from a successful raid or battle, roughly half the loot, including slaves, was taken by the ruler on behalf of the state. Many slaves were exported across the Sahara or traded in sub-Saharan regional markets. When Monday rulers required horses from neighboring kingdoms, they sent slaves to be exchanged for them. In the 18th century, when captives arrived in the Bamana kingdom of Segu, there was a period of transition when their former identity was taken away. They were given new names. They would have their heads shaved into special patterns that indicated their slave status. A person who was already a slave when he was captured would have a lower status than a formerly free man. A formerly free man could be brought back in exchange for 2 slaves if his family could afford it. If for some reason the ransom failed to arrive and the captive had been a chief or a man of proven ability, he might be placed in some position of responsibility. On the other hand, if he was considered a threat because of political influence, a tendency toward violence, or inclination to escape, he was quickly sold or put to death. Skilled craftsmen such as blacksmiths or jelly, who were highly prized for their musical and verbal skills, often avoided becoming slaves. They would simply enter the service of their captors and continue to practice their occupations. In the case of a woman of high status, it was possible for her to become a wife of one of her captors. Connections, peoples of the cliffs. Doggone houses are made of mud brick with tiny rectangular buildings with thatched roofs are granaries, and the larger buildings are residences. So as you can see here is a depiction of that, right? A photo of that. The Muslim rulers of the Mali Empire had no problem with making slaves of non-Muslims. They would send out small raiding parties to capture unbelievers in their villages and make them servants, farmers, and soldiers, or they would send them across the Sahara to be sold in North Africa. Sometimes in the 15th century, non-Muslim peoples called Dogon fled to a region called the Bandiagara Plateau. Here they could defend themselves from slave raiders by building their villages among big rocks at the base of high cliffs that extended for 125 miles. So, the doggone were being targeted as slaves. I think someone said they had a confusion, but as you can see, they were being targeted. It says here, using mud, brick, and stone, the doggone built their houses and granaries in a unique style that makes them look like they grew naturally out of the cliffs. In 1890, French colonizers put an end to the slave raiding. Some doggone moved out to their savannah farmlands below, but most of them still occupy their unique houses and villages beneath the cliffs. If a captive who had previously been free was from a family that held the kind of special relationship known as the Sanankuya with the captive's family, he would probably be freed. A legendary example of this happened when a chief named Nyenyekoro knew he was going to be attacked by the army of Segu, led by Famata Diarra. He also knew he had no chance against their superior strength. He told all his advisors to take off their clothes, thus reducing their social status to the level of uncircumcised boys. With sandals dangling from his ears and an artificial tail dragging behind, Nyenyekoro led his group out of town to meet the invaders. He introduced himself and his men as Traore, a family line that he knew had a special relationship with the Diarra. By thus allowing himself to be ridiculed, he saved his town from being destroyed and his people from enslavement. The social custom of Sinan Kuya. In Monday society, ancient family names that are very common, such as Kieta, Kulubati. Somebody says blurry presentation. Here, I'm going to blow it up right there. Boom. There you go. It's not a presentation. It's an actual book I'm reading from. All right. It says the social customs of Sinankuya. In Monday society, ancient family names that are very common, such as Kieta, Kulubali, Korama, Kamara, Traore, and Konda, have special significance. They have been passed down from the earliest ancestors who are described in the oral tradition as great heroes and heroines. Monday people with these names take their basic identities from the heroic deeds said to have been performed by their ancestors. In these oral traditions, some of the ancestors endured great suffering of experienced great adventure together. Sometimes these included wars with one another that were later settled peacefully. These historic experiences caused special bonds to form between them. These special relationships are called Sinankuya, or joking relationships. Sinankuya recognizes the special ancient bonds between the families through the social custom of publicly insulting and ridiculing each other. For example, whenever two people with the ancient names of Traore or Conde meet, one of them will always announce that the other is his or her slave. That person will laugh and deny it and call the other person their slave. The two people may continue laughing and insulting each other for several minutes, making up hilarious stories about each other's families. Local bystanders appreciate the humor and probably do the same thing when they meet someone from a family with whom they have a Sinanku relationship. These kinds of exchanges remind the members of the two families of their historic relationships and demonstrate that nothing truly bad can ever occur between them. Once settled into the community, ordinary slaves could find partners and have their own families. Slaves born in their master's house had a different status than the ones who were captured in war. The status of one house-born slave relative to another depended on their individual duties in the household and the owners ranked in the overall community. For example, a slave born in a chief's house would rank higher than a slave born in the home of a merchant. Any slave born in the community would rank higher than a newly arrived captive. The status of second and third generations of slaves born in the community would gradually become blurred, and still later generations would eventually become part of the original owner's family. In Monday kingdoms with permanent armies as opposed to militias organized only in time of need, soldiers lived in villages that were populated by slave families who lived pretty much like everyone else. The slaves farmed and produced food for the army and for urban markets. The scriptures of the court of Mali say that the royal bodyguard was staffed by slaves. Courageous, hard-fighting warriors who were taken captive in battle were often put in the army that captured them and could rise to positions of power. Sakura, who became one of Mali's greatest rulers, was a former slave. The hunters of Monday. Any man could be a hunter. He accomplished this by becoming an apprentice, a person who learns a skill by working for someone who has that skill, to a master hunter and being accepted into a hunter's association. The determining factor in being accepted into a hunter's association was not how many animals the hunter killed, but his moral character. For example, a man who was known to be a drunk or to have casual relationships with many women will be rejected. In ancient times, a man's apprenticeship ended when he killed 3 of the largest and most dangerous animals, such as an elephant, lion, buffalo, or hippopotamus. In more recent times, large animals are very scarce, so an apprenticeship can last indefinitely. In early times, master hunters carried the title Simbon. They received praise names based on their exploits, such as lion killing hunter, Jarafaga Donso, or buffalo killing hunter, Sigi Faga Donso. Historically, authority in Mundi was usually based on age, with the oldest son of a particular family succeeding the father. But with hunters, the chief was the one who was accepted into the society before everyone else. Among the regular members, a son or a younger brother who joined first was senior to his father or older brother. The chief of the hunters did not need to be a great hunter or in particular social status. He could even be the descendant of a slave. He would remain chief until his death. When he was succeeded by the next hunter with seniority in the association. And here's, I guess, a depiction of one of those Malian hunters. In the days of the Mali Empire, some of the people who refused to become Muslims were called Bamana. The amulets on this Bamana's hunter shirt protect him from all danger. Under all those protective medicines, the shirt is woven of cotton cloth called bogalan, or mud cloth, because the dyes used to decorate it contain a special kind of mud. So I'll let you guys see the image one more time. This is what we're getting a description of. When there were large wild animals that killed cattle or destroyed crops, the Hunters Association would hold a meeting before a big group hunt. In modern times, they meet on special occasions such as Mali's Independence Day, September 22nd. That's actually my birthday right there. The most frequent occasions for Hunters Association meetings are funeral ceremonies for dead hunters. There's one ceremony held 7 days after the death, another 40 days after, and a commemorative ceremony every 3 to 7 years. At the funeral ceremonies, hunters march in circles and fire their guns into the air. Musicians play the calabash hunter's harp and sing songs praising the dead person or recounting the legendary feats of famous hunters of the past. In traditional belief, when hunters go into the bush to pursue wild game, they are entering the land of potentially dangerous genies and other spirits. The habits and locations of bush spirits and strategies for dealing with them are among the most important things apprentices learn from master hunters. Genies are believed to inhabit certain kinds of trees, especially the baobab, unusual rock formations, and bodies of water. Hunters have to know how to protect themselves. One strategy is to form alliances with genies who become protectors and guides. Master hunters carry various kinds of projective objects called the amulets and are believed to be sorcerers. They never display their power in public, but are respected and feared in the villages and towns. Group insurance. Today, when Monday hunters join their local association, they pay a membership fee. This serves as a kind of insurance fund for any members injured by a wild animal or wounded by a malfunctioning weapon. Traditional religion in Monday society. All African peoples had their own religions thousands of years before they felt the influence of any outsiders. In sub-Saharan Africa, traditional religion probably developed in prehistoric times, along with other fundamental aspects of culture. There are rock paintings in southern Africa dating from 6,000 and 2000 BCE that appears to represent a continuous tradition of religious ritual practiced by hunters. Eventually, many African systems of thought were influenced by the introduction of Islam and Christianity. Nevertheless, in most African languages, there's no word for religion because the spiritual and ritual aspects of society are simply part of life. These cultural values can be referred to as traditional religions or belief systems. At all times in Monday society, including the days of the Mali Empire, spiritual considerations have been part of just about every aspect of daily life. People in traditional rural villages are always conscious of how their actions affect their relationship with invisible inhabitants of the spirit world. There are names for different supernatural beings, but nowadays most people refer to them all as genies, which comes from the Arabic word jinn. In the great oral tradition of Suhada, which provides much information about what the Mandi bards believed life was like in the days of the Mali Empire, virtually every deed performed by the heroic ancestors take into account their relationship with the world of spirits. Early in the 13th century, rulers of Mali were starting to become Muslim, and some of them made the pilgrimage to Mecca, but the vast majority of their subjects kept their spiritual connections to the traditional religion of their ancestors. Nowadays, most people who live in the ancient imperial heartland claim to be Muslims, but many of them practice Islam and also keep something of their ancient belief system. Everyone in Mandi society understands that humans and genies share the world, but some occupations demand particular knowledge and skill in communicating with supernatural beings. Shrine priests, carvers of masks and other ritual objects, herbalists, healers, midwives, women who deliver babies, and various kinds of fortune tellers confront supernatural beings daily and specialize in pleasing and manipulating the ones who shape the course of events. Worship as part of life. Today, there are mosques for the Muslims and the Mandi communities, but there is no house of worship for traditional Mandi religion. People practice their religious beliefs at all times and everything they do. For rural villagers in traditional culture, the activities of farming, hunting, fishing, trading in the weekly market, walking through the bush between villages, performing daily chores, and even speaking have spiritual significance. Music, song, dance, oral narrative, sculpture, and crafted works of all kinds are expressions of the Mandi system of belief. They can be seen and heard in performance, media, museums, and galleries worldwide. Whatever goes wrong, the Mandi do not believe in accidents, whether it is illness, early death, failure to have children, injury, crop failure, business failure, or any other kind of problem. It is thought to be caused by an enemy, an evil genie, or by being exposed to uncontrolled spiritual energy called niyama. Proper relations with genies and correct manipulation of niyama can result in good health, achieving one's goal, and prosperity. As we're seeing, these people are deeply religious, right? I hope y'all get that. Because you got some people that are deeply atheists or avowed atheists claiming that they're representing West African culture, and they're not. Because these people are obviously have always been a religious group of individuals. It says here, of all the occupational specialists, blacksmiths are generally regarded as the most qualified to mediate between humans and genies. Not all blacksmiths are willing or able to attempt the manipulation of spiritual power, though, and other people such as bards and knowledgeable elders, including women, share these tasks. One reason blacksmiths have the inside track on healing and sorcery is that their ability to create essential tools and weapons out of raw materials seem like magic. It is blacksmiths who perform circumcisions, but only a few dare to. This is because the powerful spiritual force called niyama is released in dangerous amounts as soon as the flesh is cut. It is believed that if the circumciser does not know how to protect himself, he can be blinded. When dangerous animals are killed, they release enormous amounts of niyama. So many of the greatest hunters have been blacksmiths. Other magical practices dominated by blacksmiths include rainmaking and divination, predicting the future. Divination is an important part of the Mandi belief system, and specialists have many ways of doing it. One of the most common methods is to throw cowrie shells onto a woven straw mat or tray. The usual number of cowries is 12, but totals of 16, 20, and 40 are also used. The scattered cowries are interpreted according to the patterns in which they land. It's almost similar to casting lots at this point, what they're doing here. It says here, small stones can also be thrown and interpreted according to how many stick in the diviner's hand or are snatched up in a quick follow-through motion. Other diviners drop cola nuts or horsehair into a calabash full of water and interpret how they float or read their patterns. Still, others use a leather pouch or a black bag containing small bones, dry bits of animals such as tails, straps of paper with symbols drawn on them, and other mysterious objects. Anyway, in sand divination, the diviner smooths a pile of special sand into a flat surface, while saying incantations, magic words. He or she draws and interprets symbols on the sand while guided by a supernatural force. Many diviners are blacksmiths, but anyone who has the necessary power and vision can practice the art, including women. Some diviners are Islamic practitioners called the Mori. Although they are Muslims, they maintain contact with the spirits of pre-Islamic belief. These kinds of diviners have been seen using both cowrie shells and pages of Arabic text to see into the spirit world. Diviners then and now combine traditional beliefs such as fortune telling, using shells with the Muslim religious beliefs of the Quran. As you can see, there's depiction of one right up there, and you can see the cowrie shells on the mat, and you can see it looks like maybe that's the Quran or some type of book they're using there. It says diviners function as a problem solver and healer. Someone who is having trouble getting pregnant will go to the diviner for help. So will a person with illness in the family or a run of bad luck. The diviner interprets the signs to identify the source of the client's problem, perhaps finding that the client has a human enemy somewhere or has accidentally offended their spirit. The diviner will then prescribe a solution that often involves making a sacrifice. The nature of the sacrifice depends on the seriousness of the problem. It can range from a few cola nuts or a chicken to something as valuable as a goat or a cow. We have a depiction or a stone, a Skia Muhammad. Nobody knows what a Skia Muhammad actually looked like, but this statue stands in the street of Guyana because its memory is so important to the Songhai people today. And here's the image again. Chapter 6. Told you we finishing this book, man. We don't play on games. Pro literacy. This is the last chapter in the book. Then we'll finish. We'll read the epilogue. Chapter 6. The Songhai people. The Songhai people of today live in a region that extends into the 3 modern countries: Mali's Niger Bend area, down the river in the Republic of Niger, and northern Benin. In rural villages of the Niger Bend in the inland delta, the Songhai are mainly millet and rice farmers. Songhai societies consist of people of various cultures who speak different languages and come from neighboring regions. It is therefore embraces a wide variety of customs and influences from elsewhere. For example, the oral artists of Songhai are very similar to the Maninka and Bamana bards known as Jelly. Like the Jelly, they specialize in speech, music, and storytelling, but they are known by the Soninke term Gesserit, which probably indicates that they originated in ancient Ghana. When Gesserit narrate their oral traditions, they sometimes use a secret language, which consists of Soninke with some words of Fula and Bamana. Songhai societies organize and govern according to social status. People of highest rank are the descendants of nobles and rulers of the Songhai Empire. One distinct social group is made up of people claiming to be descendants of the great ruler Si Ali Beri. For example, another group identifies itself as descendants of the Skia Muhammad Torre. They share power and influence with local Muslim religious leaders depending on the size of the community. There might also be a government official in the residence. Many of the ordinary peasants, farmers, craftsmen, and domestic workers are descended from the conquered people of medieval times. The ancestors of these groups were captives and slaves. Slavery made up a large part of the population of the Songhai Empire. Again, side note, this is me speaking. So all you people that's trying to deny slavery and the history of slavery in West Africa, you guys are bananas, you're not red. But that's what we're here for. This is what YAP's here for. We're here to get you guys up to speed. We are pro-literacy here. As you can see, a large population of the Songhai were slaves, as we just seen. Long before Europeans, before the Songhai, even before them, we read that slavery was pretty much integral to the economy of these West African empires. All right, let's keep reading. It says here, the people of entire towns and regions might be considered captive slaves if their city was conquered by Songhai armies. As slaves, they could be sold or sent anywhere. If they were farmers or craftsmen, however, they might not be removed from their homelands because they would be more productive if left where they were. A mix of cultures. When describing societies that were part of a great medieval empire, it is essential to remember that individual cultures cannot be separated out as if they lived by themselves. When the Songhai lived in a particular region, they were not and still are not the only people there. Towns and cities in the Niger Bend and Inland Delta are populated by a great mix of cultures. In addition to the Songhai, there are also Mandi peoples, including Maninka, Bamana, and Diula. All 3 of these groups speak similar dialects of the same basic Mandi language. In early times, one distinctive between the Maninka and the Bamana was that many Maninka were Muslims, while the Bamana kept their traditional religious practices. The Yula, who now live mainly in northern coast, the coast of Ivory, were long-distance traders in gold. They exported this gold to the Ghana Empire for the trans-Saharan trade. The Yula continued their gold trading in the Mali and Songhai empires, but by at least the 15th century, they had also become Muslims. People of the Soninke ancestry are also mixed with the Songhai and are also Muslims. Their ancestors in the Ghana Empire were among the first Western Sudan populations exposed to Islam. They prefer to live in towns and cities where many of them are in business. Other people of Mali who can be seen mingling with Songhai in ports and markets of urban centers include Moorish and Tuareg nomads of the desert, Bozo fishers, and ferryboat men Simono and Sorko, who also specialize in watercraft, and Fula cattle herders out in the countryside. There are multi-ethnic villages that contain two or more of these societies. In Niger and northern Benin, the Songhai share communities with cultures native to those areas. In a large town or city, each culture group will have its own neighborhood. Each of these neighborhoods has a lineage head or chief who is probably the oldest male of the family that is known to descend from a distinguished ancestor. He represents his neighborhood in a council of notables headed by a chief who very likely traces his ancestry to the Songhai Empire. The medieval hierarchy. According to the description written in the 17th century Timbuktu Chronicles, Songhai society in the 15th and 16th century was dominated by men. Men of the Songhai ruling class had multiple wives and concubines. This could result in one man having hundreds of children. Askia Muhammad the Great is thought to have had as many as 471 children. When older brothers died, younger brothers inherited their goods and their wives. When the father died, his oldest son inherited leadership of the family. There were several levels of social status in Songhai that were dependent on a person's birth. During the days of the Askias, the royal and other aristocrats were considered to be of noble birth. The royal family ruled the empire and occupied the most powerful positions of government. Local nobility carried out the administrative functions at the intermediate and lower levels of government. One step below nobles in the social hierarchy were the freemen, ordinary citizens who were not born into slavery. Among the freemen were Muslim clerics who had all positions of religious authority. There was also a class of people who specialized in arts and crafts such as ironworking, woodworking, pottery, weaving, dyeing cloth, and masonry, stone cutting. The Gesserit who played music and narrated traditional legends were among these occupational specialists. In the days of Askias of Songhai, the chief Gesserit had the title Gesserit Dunka. At the bottom of the social hierarchy were slaves who had been taken captive during wars, acquired in trade, or born into slavery. The conditions and status of slaves varied widely. A fierce warrior captured in battle would be highly valued and might rise to become an officer in the Songhai army. Another member of the slave classes might simply be a farmer who was in a defeated clan. He might have to pay an annual fee in the form of goods and services. Someone born into a family that had been enslaved generations earlier might almost impossible to tell apart from a freeborn person. Some groups, such as the people called the Arbi, were considered possessions of the Askia. They were slaves in the royal residences, bodyguards, and farmers who raised grain for the Askias. The Sorko masters of the water. The Niger River flows through much of the Songhai territory in the inland delta as a vast region of creeks, rivers, ponds, and lakes. Therefore, boats have always been very important. Dugout canoes were made by hollowing out a single tree trunk. Large boats called kanta were constructed by drilling holes in wood planks, sewing them together with strong twine or leather strips, and then sealing the holes and seams. Boats are still built this way, as some of the sealing material is made from a plant called burgu. Several boat building groups of the inland delta claimed to be masters of the water, but in medieval Songhai, only the Sorko held that distinction. Today, they are generally seen as being dominant in the fishing industry. In addition to being great fishermen, the Sorko are hunters of all large animals that live near the water or in it, including elephants, hippopotamus, crocodiles, and manatees. The Sorko are also priests who associate with genies. One of their most important genies is Mai, who had a genie mother and a blacksmith father. The Mai is the genie of the floods and causes the river water to rise. Connections, a wild river plant. Along the edge of the river in the Great Niger Bend grows a plant called burgu that provides excellent food for horses. Burgu also grows out in the river itself, where it is a favorite food of the manatees and the hippopotamus, sometimes called the river horse. This wild plant is also a favorite to humans. It has a sweet, syrupy sap with edible seeds that resemble wild rice. Local people also use it to thatch the roofs of their houses, seal the seams of leaky boats, and make soap in indigo, dark blue dye. The original homeland of the Sorko is said to have been the ancient state of Kebbi. It was located in what is now northern Nigeria. The first boats, called Kanta, that appeared in Songhai were built in Kebbi and brought up the river to Gayo. In the days of Askias, the Sorko were among the socially inferior classes. The Niger River and its tributaries were the strategic and economic lifelines of the Songhai Empire, so the Askia had to control the Sorko. The 17th century Timbuktu historian claimed the Sorko were owned by the Askias. This meant that whenever they were called on by the ruler, they had to obey his commands for water transport, whether in peace or war. Traffic jam on the river. One of the Timbuktu historians reported that at one time, the riverbank at Gayo, there were 400 kanta that were described as Askia's barges. There were also 1,000 other boats belonging to the Sorko, and 600 or 700 other boats belonging to the Askia family traders and other people. Traditional religion. Long before Berber traders carried Islam across the Sahara Desert and introduced it into the Songhai society, there were powerful traditional priests who communicated with a variety of local spirits. These priests were still around during the empire as they are today. They are diviners and sorcerers, or Sohonsi in the Songhai language. The Sohonsi are among the most learned people of their society. They use special ways of communicating with the spirit world to discover what seems to be the source of problems that arise among individuals in the entire community. Once the problem is identified, the Sohonsi seek solutions by conducting ritual sacrifices to communicate with the appropriate spirits. The Sohonsi is knowledgeable about different kinds of poisons and the medicinal properties of healing herbs. Therefore, he can select from a wide variety of remedies according to the nature of the problem. He might prescribe an herbal cure, or depending on the seriousness of the problem, he might indicate the necessity of sacrificing kola nuts, a chicken, or a goat. If he believes an enemy is the source of the problem, the Sohonsi might use sorcery that will sicken or even kill the person responsible. Since at least the 11th century in Songhai culture, religion has involved a combination of traditional spiritual beliefs and Islam. In Songhai, Islam has been regarded as an additional source of power that could be combined with traditional practices. In the Kingdom of Gayo and later in the Songhai Empire, Islam was a powerful force in the urban centers such as Gayo, Timbuktu, and Janneh. And it had at least some influence in the imperial government. Looking back at the literature on Songhai history, Islam might seem more important than it actually was. However, because the writers of Timbuktu were Muslim and regarded their own religion as very important. And the Kingdom of Gayo, before it developed into the Songhai Empire, many of the merchants involved in the trans-Saharan trade were North African Muslim Berbers. They traded with the peoples on the southern fringe of the Sahara, including the Songhai. And Gayo, a commercial and residential area with mosque, was established for the Muslim merchants. Later, as Islam became increasingly influential, one of Gayo's earlier ruling dynasties, probably the Maliks, allowed a mosque to be built in their own part of the city. The Sorcerer King. In Songhai culture, the greatest hero is Si Ali Biri. He was a historical person who actually ruled from 1464 to 1492. But in the oral traditions of the Songhai storyteller, Si Ali becomes a mythical figure. He is called Sat Biri Wandu, the great and dangerous Za, a sorcerer who commanded great magical power. Si Ali's mother was from a small country town whose people were not strict Muslims. Their religious leaders were Sohonsi and various kinds of healers who followed the traditional religion. As a Songhai prince, Ali received some basic instruction in the religion of Islam, but when he became an adult, he displayed more faith in the ancient ways of magic and sorcery. When he came to power in Songhai, he ruled over Muslim traders and scholars who lived in the cities, but most of his subjects were farmers, hunters, and fishermen of the countryside who were not Muslims. Therefore, Si Ali was able to govern most effectively by maintaining his association with both Islam and the religion of his ancestors. According to the Arab geographer al-Muhalabi, who wrote before 985, by the time that mosque was built, the ruler of Gayo had converted to Islam, and many of his subjects were also Muslims. This religious conversion improved relations with Muslim traders and increased the king's influence over them. Some of the early Songhai rulers and many of the ordinary citizens did not necessarily regard Islam as a replacement for their traditional religion. Rather, they tended to think of it as a source of additional spiritual power, and spiritual power was something all people in the Middle Niger region valued greatly. That's called when two religions mix or two different cultures mix. It's called a consecration. I can't remember the word, man. Somebody in the chat let me know what that word is. I can't think of it right now. When you mix two beliefs or religions together. Anyway, let's continue. Officers of the court and army. The historians of Timbuktu gave the titles of no less than 63 offices that existed during the time of the Askias. There is too many to describe in this book, but here are a few of the most important and interesting. The office of the Balma existed before the time of the Skias and probably originated. Thank you, brother. Syncretism. Syncretism. That's the word I was looking for. Appreciate that, Hassan. Syncretism. Appreciate that, D-Red. That's the word I was looking for. It says here, the office of the Balma'a existed before the time of the Skias and probably originated in the Ghana Empire. And Songhai, the Balma'a, was one of the most powerful officers. He was a military commander of the western part of the empire and was based at Kabara, the port of Timbuktu. The Balma'a was specially greeted with the title Tunkara, which had been a term for the Soninke royalty in the 11th century. Here's an image. I believe this is a mosque. The second two famous mosques of Timbuktu, the Sankore Mosque, was financed by a wealthy woman who was probably Tuareg. The date of construction is not known, but the first imam of this mosque was appointed around 480. So here again, here you go again. Here's a picture of that mosque. It says the Hikoi was a high-ranking military officer who was responsible for all river traffic. The Hikoi was admiral of the fleet of riverboats that carried many of the Sialese troops when he attacked Timbuktu in 1469 and when they laid siege to Janneh. In peacetime, the big boats carried many kinds of cargo, such as rice from the royal plantations along the river into Gayo. In their own words, making a quick call from Janneh. Like any busy administrator 500 years ago in the Songhai Empire, the Mansa of Janneh wanted the fastest kind of communication available. According to the writer Abd al-Rahman al-Sadi, born 1594, this is how it was done. If the Mansa wants to summon the Janneh, someone living near Lake Debo, his messengers goes to a gate in the wall and calls the name of the person in question. People pass on the message from village to village, and it reaches the person immediately, and he comes and presents himself. In 1646, al-Sadi got a job as the secretary in the government of Timbuktu. While there, he wrote his history of the Songhai Empire, Tariq al-Sudan. So many of you guys listening, you guys shouldn't be familiar with Tariq al-Sudan, right? A lot of people, especially Hebrew Israelites, they run to that book or they reference that book to prove that there were Jews in this region, right? So you guys shouldn't be familiar with that name. It says, he said the territory of Janneh contained more than 7,000 villages that were within shouting distance of each other. They extended hundreds of miles from one end of the country to the other. The Kermina Fari was the highest ranking officer in the government, second only to the Askia. The Timbuktu historians claim that the title was created by Askia Muhammad, who first gave it to his brother Umar Komad Diaka. In 1497, the city of Tenderma in the Lakes regions of Niger Delta was the Kermina Fari's seat of authority. This officer had the special privilege of wearing his hat when throwing dust on his head to greet the Askia. Beginning in 1579, the Kermina Fari was put in charge of all western provinces of the empire. The office of Kermina Fari could be very dangerous for the man who held it. When Ishak I came to power, Kermina Fari was Hamad Aryu, whom Askia Ishak had put to death. Ishak appointed Ali Kasira as the next Kermina Fari, but Ali Kasira was arrogant and a tyrant. The historian al-Sani relates a story in which a Muslim scholar asked the Kermina Fari why he sold men into slavery. He asked him if he was not afraid that one day he would himself be sold. Ali Kasira was astonished and angry at such a suggestion, but this is exactly what eventually happened to him. On one occasion, when Askia Ishak paid a visit to Timbuktu, he was getting into a boat at the port of Kabara. At that moment, Ali Kasira made a public attempt to murder him. The attempt failed, and the Kermina Fara was forced to flee to an oasis in the desert. There he was taken and sold as a slave. He was set to work irrigating the gardens. One day, he was recognized by an Arab who used to sell him sources, and he jumped into a well and committed suicide. Drum lords and rival brothers. Rival brothers were half-brothers who had the same father but different mothers. Often problems arose between rival brothers who were sons of Askia. An incident that resulted from the death of one of Askia Muhammad's officers, the Binga Farma, governor of the Lakes, is a good example of this. In Shanghai, all of the highest ranking officers were called drum lords because they were permitted to have their own drummers as symbols of authority. Whenever the officer went anywhere, his drummer would march ahead of him to announce his arrival. And we get a depiction of that here. It says, though more often used today for musical performances, as here in Guinea in 2000, drums in medieval times were used as symbols of high office. For instance, high-ranking officials were called drum lords because they were the only people who could have their own drummers. One of the drum lords, the Benga farmer, died in about 1525. Askia Muhammad appointed one of his younger sons, Bala, to the office as a reward for his great courage in battle. Many of Bala's older brothers had great respect for his bravery, but they were outraged when they heard that their younger brother had been appointed to the prestigious post of being a farmer. They swore that when Bala went to Gayo, they would split open his drum. Bala heard about the threats of his envious brothers. He swore back at them with a terrible insult. He said he would split open the backside of the mother of anyone who tried to split his drum. God damn. Let's keep reading. Dividing his envious elder brothers, Bala went to Gayo with his drummer marching ahead of him. There were certain spots in the city beyond which nobody's drum except the Askia was allowed to be sounded. But Bala told his drummer to keep drumming past this spot and all the way until they reached the palace gate. When the drum was heard, it was customary for the army commanders to ride out to salute any drum lord. When the officers emerged from the palace, the envious brothers who had threatened to split open the drum were among them. None of the angry brothers dared to do anything to Bala then, but they became dangerous enemies. Later, when Askia Musa came to power and began killing off his brothers, Bala ran away to Timbuktu. But Musa had warned everyone that they were not to help his younger brother. He said if they did, they would be executed. When Bala was refused protection in Timbuktu, he went to meet Askia Musa. The new king had him arrested and put to death. Fighting over salt. A lot of y'all want to learn West African history. You're learning it. You're learning the culture. You're learning that. A lot of it's not marshmallows and rainbows, right? It's human history, right? This happens. It's good and bad, right? Anyway, fighting over salt. The salt mines of Taghaza in the Sahara Desert were about halfway between Shanghai and Morocco. Because of their location, the two countries were always fighting over who would control them. The mines were an extremely important source of revenue. A steady flow of camel caravans loaded with salt their way south to the markets of Timbuktu and Janneh to be distributed throughout the Shanghai Empire. During the 16th century, the rulers of Morocco repeatedly tried to capture the salt mines from Shanghai, or at least to force the Askias to pay taxes on the salt. However, for most of that century, Shanghai was too powerful for the Moroccans to take away their salt revenues. And as you can see, salt collections here from the source. It says women collect sea salt on the tidal flat in Senegal, the eastern edge of the 14th century Mali Empire. Soon after Askia Ishaq I took power, Moulay Ahmed, the ruler of Morocco, sent a message to Askia demanding that he give up control of Taghaza to Morocco. Askia Ishaq's reply was that Ahmad will not hear news of such an agreement and that any man named Ishaq who would take such a proposition seriously had not yet been born. Then, to demonstrate Shanghai power, Askia Ishaq I sent 2,000 cavalry soldiers across the desert to an important market town in the valley near Marrakesh. Their orders were to make a raid without killing anyone and return immediately to Shanghai. They raided the market of Bana Asba, where caravans from across the Sahara brought their goods. The raiders looted all the goods they found in the market and returned to Shanghai without killing anyone. The importance of controlling Taghaza because of all the revenue it brought in, continued to cause periodic struggles between Shanghai and Morocco. The Shanghai reaction to Moroccan efforts to take over Taghaza varied from time to time. Apparently, it depended on whether or not the Askia was inclined to go to war. Personal relations between the Askias of Shanghai and the sultans of Morocco were also complicated, depending on the individual personalities and circumstances. A world-famous armor. The musician Ali Farka Touré, 1939 to 2006, was an arma, a descendant of the Moroccans who conquered Shanghai in 1591. Farka is a nickname that means donkey, a symbol of physical strength and endurance. Ali got because he was the 10th child of his parents, but was the first one to live beyond childhood. His father was killed fighting in the French army in World War II. After the war, the family settled near Funke, a Niger Delta town about 150 miles south of Timbuktu. Beginning in 1976, Ali Farka Touré recorded 17 albums. In 1994, the album Talking Timbuktu, which he made with American musician Ry Cooder, won a Grammy Award after releasing the album Nia Funke in 1999. Ali went on to perform around the world. He then settled down on his farm near Nia Funke to grow rice and fruit. From that time on, Ali was reluctant to leave his farm, but in 2005, he won his second Grammy with the album In the Heart of the Moon with the famous Malian kora player Tamani Diabate. Ali's last album, Savani, was released after his death in 2006 and received another Grammy nomination for Best Contemporary World Music Album. In 1578, a new Moroccan ruler, Moulay Ahmad al-Dahabi, decided he wanted to control the Tahaza salt mines. He sent Askia Dawad a message saying that he must hand over 1 year's taxes collected from Tahaza's production. Instead, the Askia sent the Sultan far more than he asked for, 10,000 mikwals of gold as a goodwill gift. Moulay Ahmad was so astonished at Dawad's generosity that a friendship developed between them. 4 years later, when Moulay Ahmad heard of the death of Askia Dawad, he was greatly sad and officially went into mourning. In 1586, a new ruler of Morocco, Ahmad al-Hashimi, considered invading Shanghai to test the wealth and strength of the empire. He sent a spy with expensive gifts for Askia al-Hajj. The Askia was unaware that a man was a spy and did not wish to be outdone, so he responded by sending even richer gifts back to the Moroccan ruler, including slaves and civet cats. This made the Moroccan ruler all the more interested in the wealth of the territories south of the Sahara. Sometime after receiving the gifts from Askia al-Hajj, the Moroccan ruler sent an army of 20,000 men across the Sahara with orders to take control of the lands all the way to Timbuktu. However, the Moroccan army suffered terribly from hunger and thirst during their very difficult desert crossing. The survivors returned to Morocco without having conquered anything. The Moroccan army finally did conquer Shanghai in 1591. The Moroccan ruler wanted to retain control of Shanghai, so he assigned troops and administrators to continue occupying Gayo, Timbuktu, and Janneh. The occupying soldiers were known by the Arabic term al-Ruma, meaning shooters or musketeers. Shanghai people pronounce al-Ruma as Arma, and this became the term used to describe Moroccan ruling classes. Most of the Moroccan troops and officers never returned to North Africa. They married the local women, and their descendants still form a social class called Arma. We got a depiction here. It says music based on traditional West African rhythms continues to be a big part of the world music scene. Haruna Samaki is one of Mali's most famous musicians, particularly for the skill with the Kamala Ngoni, which is the modern version of the Donso Ngoni, or Sacred Hunter's Harp, as you can see here. Now we're at the epilogue. We're about to finish this, man. We're at the last step of my half step from legendary. All right. The epilogue. By 1884, European interest in controlling the natural resources in Africa had grown. Great Britain, France, Portugal, Belgium, and Germany were openly competing for control of territory all over the continent. In West Africa, Great Britain, France, and Germany had each gained control of sections of the Atlantic coast. They did it both by signing treaties with local African rulers and by outright military conquest. The Europeans did not hesitate to go to war against the Africans who were trying to defend their homelands, but they wanted to avoid going to war with each other in what came to be the scramble for Africa. In 1884 and 1885, a conference was held in Britain, Germany, to lay the ground rules for European conquest of Africa. The representatives of 14 European nations and the United States met for 13 weeks. No Africans were invited. French conquest. French dreams of acquiring riches and glory of controlling the Western Sudan had begun in the 18th century. At the Berlin Conference, French representatives protected their claims to the interior regions of the upper Niger River. In the 20 years following the Berlin Conference, the French became fully committed to their conquest of the Western Sudan. By the time of the Berlin Conference, the French already controlled the island of Gorée off the Condé Senegal and St. Louis at the mouth of the Senegal River. The French wanted to carve a route into the interior of Africa by continuing up the Senegal River and then overland the Niger River, but there were two powerful Western Sudanic empires standing in their way. One of these empires was founded by Al-Hajj Umar Tal, 1796 to 1864, a Muslim who belonged to a group called the Tukulor in the Fanta Toro region near the Senegal River. In the 1830s and 1840s, Umar Tal established a new religious movement. He also began equipping his many Muslim followers with firearms purchased from coastal traders. Between 1848 and 1852, Umar Tal began using the concept of jihad or armed struggle in the service of God as a reason to conquer many of the small kingdoms of Western Sudan. He took over lands from the Senegal River to the inland delta of the Niger. In 1861, Umar Tal's Tukulor army captured the powerful kingdom of Segu, which controlled territory that had once belonged to both Mali and the Songhai empires. From 1862 to 1863, the Tukulor army conquered the Fula states of Hamdulillah and Masina in the inland delta and looted Timbuktu. The Fula and their allies soon rebelled, and Umar Tal was killed. His son Shehu Ahmadu maintained the Tukulor Empire until it was weakened by internal fighting in the 1870s and 1880s. It was finally occupied by invading French forces in the early 1890s. The other Western Sudanic Empire blocking the French route to Niger River was founded by the Maninka named Samori Touré, circa 1830 to 1900. Samori was from a non-Muslim traders. In the 1860s, he organized a private army to protect their business interests. Sometimes in the late 1860s or 1870s, Samori became a Muslim. In 1884, he took the prestigious Islamic title of Almani, or Imam, a religious leader. Throughout the 1870s, Samori expanded the power into the ancient gold field of Borain and southward into the forest of what is today Eastern Guinea. The populations in the territories conquered by Samori were mostly non-Muslim. By the mid-1880s, Samori had established what came to be known as the Maninka Empire in what is now Eastern Guinea, Western Mali, and northern coast of Ivory. To promote pride and solidarity in the population, he encouraged them to identify their state with medieval Mali. In 1888, he tried to convert the entire population to Islam, but many people rebelled, and he had to withdraw that policy. From 1881 to 1898, Samori's army fought against French forces that were trying to conquer the Western Sudan. He had more than 30,000 soldiers, and many of them carried firearms. Thousands of muskets, a type of long gun, were acquired from agents on the coast of Sierra Leone. Samori also had entire villages of blacksmiths who manufactured firearms, musket balls, and gunpowder. As pressure from the French increased, Samori tried to move most of the empire farther east. It proved impossible to feed so many people, though. By 1898, they were cornered and starving in the mountains. Samori was forced to surrender to the French, who sent him to live in Gabon. 2 years later, he died. In their own words, women, calabashes, and gold dust. The Europeans' desire for African gold was fueled by the writings of Arab geographers and others, including Scottish explorer Mungo Park, 1771 to 1806. This is the description of women panting for gold in one of the fields that provided gold for kings of the medieval West African empires. A portion of sand or clay is put into a large calabash and mixed with a sufficient quantity of water. The women then shakes the calabash in such a manner as to mix the sand and water together and to give the whole of a rotary motion. At first gently, but afterwards more quick, until a small portion of sand and water at every revolution flies over the brim of the calabash. After the operation has been continued for some time, the sand is allowed to subside and the water poured off. The woman now takes a second calabash and shakes the sand and water gently from one to the other, reserving that portion of sand which is next to the bottom of the calabash and which is most likely to contain gold. This small quantity is mixed with some pure water and being moved about in the calabash is carefully examined. If a few particles of gold are picked out, the contents of the other calabash are examined in the same manner. She is well contented if she can obtain 3 or 4 grains from the contents of the calabashes. Some women, however, by long practice, become so well acquainted with the nature of the sand and the mode of washing it that they will collect gold where others cannot find a single particle. The gold dust is kept in quills, stopped up with cotton, and the washers are fond of displaying a number of these quills in their hair. Generally speaking, if a person uses a common diligence and a proper soul, it is supposed that as much gold may be collected in the course of the dry season as is equal to the value of 2 slaves. And that's from the Travels of Mungo Park. To the bottom of that, here's a depiction of the French army that invaded. French soldiers based in Africa, such as these photographed in 1900, were part of the European military forces that controlled colonial West Africa for decades. In 1893 and 1894, French forces conquered Janneh and Timbuktu. The nomadic Tuareg people of the Sahara continued to fight the French for another 11 years. In 1899, French forces captured Gayo, completing their conquest of the old territories and medieval empires of Ghana, Mali, and Songhai. Under French rule, the country now known as Mali was called the French Sudan. Modern Guinea. During the period of colonial rule, Guinea was referred to as the jewel of French West Africa. It had beautiful white sand beaches, Paris-style restaurants, and luxurious hotels. Guinea exported coffee, peanuts, mangoes, and pineapples. Guinea gains its independence from France on October the 2nd, 1958, by voting against remaining in the French community. The people who ran the government and the technicians who maintained utility services were angry at Guinea's vote against remaining with France. They left overnight. They took with them the plans of the water and sewer systems, ripped out electrical and telephone wires, broke up bathroom fixtures, and even removed light bulbs. Guinea was left with much of its basic support services in ruins. Damn, maybe we should have thought about them consequences right there, man. Ancient empires carved up. When the European powers divided up the African continent into colonies in the 19th century, they established artificial boundaries that cut right through ancient cultures and political systems. By the beginning of the 1960s, when the former French West African colonies had gained their independence, the former territories of medieval Ghana, Mali, and Songhai were located in several different nations. The ruins of Ghana's cities Kumbi Saleh and Aguadas are in southern Mauritania. The gold field of Bore is in Guinea, and the rest of ancient Ghana is in Mali. The heartland of the old Mali Empire is divided between Mali and Guinea, but its outer territories extended to Senegal, Mauritania, and the Ivory Coast, and Burkina Faso. The former territories of medieval Songhai now lie in Mali, Niger, and Mauritania. The ancient heartland of these empires, however, was located in what is now Guinea and Mali. Guinea's natural resources include a third of the world's high-grade bauxite, a mineral used for refining aluminum, and a huge reserve of iron ore, uranium, diamonds, and gold. The headwaters of the Niger River and many of its tributaries are in the Fata da Holland Mountains of Guinea, which means they have great potential for generating hydroelectric power. But despite all its natural resources, for the first 30 years of its independence, Guinea ranked among the world's poorest nations. Its natural resources have not been fully exploited because it has lacked the necessary infrastructure and political stability. Soon after independence, the country began sliding backward under the repressive rule of its first president, Sekou Touré, 1922-1984. He claimed to be the descendant of 19th century resistant Almani Samori Touré, who fought against the French. Touré adopted a socialist economic model for Guinea, meaning the government controlled much of the economy. And I keep telling you guys, this is me speaking, you don't want socialism. You don't want absolute socialism. You don't want fascism. You don't want that. Y'all keep claiming y'all do. I can tell by the way y'all are left-leaning. You don't want to give the government control over the economy. You're going to be screwed. Anyway, it says he imposed laws that discouraged individual ambition and eliminated private enterprise by putting the government in control of industry and agriculture. Establishing himself as a dictator, Touré ruthlessly suppressed anyone who disregarded with his politics. Let me just highlight that and say that for the future. Matter of fact, y'all, give me a minute. Let me add note. Example of socialist regime and its consequences. All right, save. Anyway, let's keep reading. Touré ruthlessly suppressed anyone who disagreed with his policies. These citizens of Guinea hold election polls in 2003 supporting the longtime president, Lassana Conté. Thousands of Guinean citizens were killed or imprisoned, and it is estimated that about 2 million people out of a population of 5.5 million fled the country. Farmers could not get reasonable prices for their crops because the government set all the prices for the food. These prices did not reflect the time and money the farmers had invested in producing the food. As a result, farmers could not make a profit, so they began to grow only enough to feed their families. People who lived near national borders supplemented their incomes by smuggling. Before independence, Guinea had been a food exporter, but by the 1980s, it was importing about 1/3 of its food. In the 1970s, Touré realized that his socialist and economic approach had failed. He restored relations with France and other Western countries, but this did not make life any better for ordinary citizens. In 1982, Amnesty International, the international human rights organization, publicized the political arrests, torture, and killings that occurred under Touré's government, but the rest of the world paid little attention. When Touré died in 1984, Guinea's army stepped in and formed a new government under the leadership of Colonel Lassana Conté. 1934 to 2008. When the army took over, Guinea's economy had been devastated by 26 years of dictatorship. The basic support services of the country were in terrible shape. Even in the capital, public utilities such as running water and electricity were irregular or non-existent. The roads were so poorly maintained that it was difficult for farmers to get their crops to market. Some Guinea basics. Guinea covers 95,000 square miles and is about the size of the state of Oregon. Its population is about 10 million. About 85% are Muslim, 8% are Christian, 7% practice ancestral religions. French is the official language, but about 40% of Guineans also speak Fula, 30% speak Manika, 20% Susu, and 10% other languages. In 2009, the adult literacy rate in Guinea was estimated at 30%. The life expectancy at birth is today estimated at about 57 years. In 2009, the per capita income in Guinea was $2,100, with 40% of the population living below the poverty line. The main agricultural products include rice, cassava, millet, sweet potatoes, coffee, bananas, palm products, pineapples, and livestock. The new government under Conte introduced a 10-point program for national recovery. This plan included restoring human rights and renovating the economy. Conte was elected president in 1993. He died in December of 2008, and the military again seized power. Captain Musa Dadis Kamara, born in 1964, is the head of the transitional government that promises to fight corruption and hold elections in December 2010. Improvements have been slow to come. Civil wars in neighboring Liberia, Sierra Leone, and the Ivory Coast have sent thousands of refugees across the border, adding to the economic problems. Guinea's greatest economic failing is poor agricultural reproduction. It is blessed with a favorable climate and relatively good soil, and 80% of the population are farmers, but only 3% of the land is cultivated because in the past, the government set food prices so low that it was not profitable for farmers to farm. Instead of exporting food crops as it did before the Sekou Touré government, Guinea still has to import food to feed its population. Modern Mali. The modern Republic of Mali came into being on September 22nd, 1960. Unlike Guinea, which lies along the Atlantic coast and has a good port, Mali is landlocked. The lack of a seaport was immediately recognized as a fundamental economic problem. Shortly after independence, Mali tried to form a federation with neighboring Senegal, which has a long Atlantic coastline, but this effort failed. Modibo Keita, 1915 to 1977, Mali's first president, claimed to be a descendant of Suharto, the founder of the Mali Empire, similar to Sekou Touré of Guinea. Keita began by establishing a socialist one-party state. We know how this is going to go. Oh, we know how this is going to go. Let me go ahead and get my note in here. Another example of socialism and its negative effects. Anyway, but his failed economic policy soon led to his downfall. In 1968, Keita was removed from power by a military group led by General Moussa Traoré, born in 1936. The Traoré government gradually modified but did not fundamentally change his policies of the Keita regime. In the 1970s, Mali tried to improve the use of its human resources by encouraging students to extend their educations. The government guaranteed jobs to all university graduates. By the 1980s, more than 60% of the nation's workforce was employed by government agencies and businesses that had been taken over by the government. This stifled private enterprise and created a huge bureaucracy, an administrative system with many layers and functions in which most of the important decisions are made by appointed officials. This bureaucracy was characterized by corruption, inefficiency, and mismanagement. When the Traore took power in 1968, he kept the single-party system introduced by Keita. By the 1980s, the Malian people were calling for democracy with competing political parties, but Traore ignored them and maintained his power through support from the army. In 1991, citizens of Mali's capital of Bamako were marching to protest the lack of democracy when soldiers shot some of them. This led to anti-government riots. A group of young army officers removed the Traore from power and sent him to prison. Their leader was Amadou Touré, born 1948. Touré became greatly respected for taking the control of Mali away from the military and restoring a civilian government. Here's a image here. A Targi singular Tuareg stands beside the surrendered guns set in cement as part of the monument to commemorate the end of the Tuareg revolt in 1995, as you can see here. In 1992, Mali returned to democracy by electing Dr. Alpha Konaré, born 1946, as its president. The election gave Mali a leader who had graduated from Indiana University in the United States. His wife, Adam Konaré, was a university professor who published books on the Mali and Songhai empires. President Kanary's effort to rebuild Mali were slowed by his country's weak economy. In 1994 and 1995, students rioted over economic hardships and soldiers had to step in. The government was also troubled by Tuareg uprising in the far north that was settled by peace agreement in 1995. In May 1997, Malians re-elected Konaré, and in 1998, he was awarded an honorary doctorate degree at Michigan State University. Some Mali basics. Mali covers 478,819 square miles and is about twice the size of Texas. Its population is about 12 million, of whom 90% are Muslim, 1% are Christian, and 9% practice ancestral religions. French is the official language because Mali was a French colony until it achieved independence. The main native language is Bamana, with Manika, which is very similar. Songhai, Fula, Dogon, Bozo, Menankia, Sanufo, Tamashak, the Tuareg language, and many others are also spoken. In 2009, the adult literacy rate was estimated at over 46%. School is required for all children ages 7 to 16. The life expectancy at birth was estimated about 50 years. The per capita income was $1,300, with 64% of the population living below the poverty line. The main agricultural products are millet, sorghum, corn, rice, sugar, cotton, peanuts, and livestock. President Konaré stepped down after his 2 terms of office. In May 2002, Amadou Touré was elected president. His political campaign was based on a program of fighting corruption, supporting peace, and development aimed at reducing poverty. Despite its good leadership, Mali is still one of the poorest countries in the world. Much of the northern part of the country is in the Sahara Desert, where the salt mines of medieval Mali and Songhai still produce the salt. Mali suffers from recurrent drought, the expansion of the desert, and infestation of locusts, insects who eat up all the crops. Although 80% of the population lives by farming and fishing, the government sometimes has to rely on international aid to make up their food shortages. Mali's mining industry exports small amounts of gold, marble, uranium, and phosphate deposits of bauxite, iron, manganese, tin, and diamonds have not yet been exploited because the country has been concentrating its limited capital on developing gold mining. Crops, markets, and food. As cash crops sold for export, farmers in Guinea produce palm oil, coffee, rice, cassava, millet, sweet potatoes, bananas, and pineapples. In Mali, major crops for export include rice, millet, sorghum, corn, sugar, peanuts, and cotton. Both countries raise cattle, sheep, goats, chickens, and guinea fowl, and in northern Mali, the Tuareg raise camels. Mango trees grow virtually everywhere in southern Mali and throughout Guinea. Depending on the season, local markets sell citrus fruit, oranges, grapefruit, lemons, limes, mangoes, bananas, peanuts, pineapples, avocados, tomatoes, plantains, corn, eggplants, lettuce, okra, variety of leafy greens, and other vegetables. Near the rivers of Guinea's Atlantic coast, fresh fish is always available. More markets sell dried fish, freshly butchered beef, or mutton, sheep, chickens, and eggs. There's rice and a variety of grains, including millet, sorghum, and fonio, plus sweet potatoes, cassava fruit, and vegetables, peanut butter, peppers, onions, garlic, salt, peanut, or palm oil, and assorted spices. In Mali culture, since the days of the Mali Empire, special flavorings have included namugu, powdered leaves of the baobab tree, sea butter made by pounding the seeds of the karite tree, dado made from dried hibiscus blossoms and leaves, datu made by fermenting hibiscus seeds and seeds from the neri plant pounded into paste that is fermented and rolled into balls to make a type of sauce called sumbala. And goyo looks like a small, hard green tomato with a bitter tasting interior, like a cross between eggplant and tomato. In the market, there are always women and their daughters selling prepared food. A favorite meal is boiled rice with sauce seasoned with peppers, onions, and spices. The dish contains bits of meat, dried or smoked fish, or leafy greens. In some markets, goat heads with the eyes still in are a favorite. Boiled and served with very peppery sauce. Sweets include mani balls made from millet flour, flavored with tamarind or lemon. Another popular treat is takura, which is a millet cake made with 5 balls of soaked millet flour that are baked or steamed in a clay pot buried in the ground. The gay is a kind of porridge made of pounded millet or rice mixed with sweetened milk. It is often served in a large calabash bowl and drunk with a calabash spoon. Another form of dege is made pounding millet or rice into a fine white powder. It is then mixed with a small amount of water sweetened with honey or sugar and rolled into little balls. The takora or money and dege balls are sometimes used by women as a sacrifice when they want to conceive a child. Little girls go around the market with loaded trays on their heads, selling mangoes, bananas, peanuts, or treats prepared at home, including money and dege balls or takura and other small cakes made of sesame seeds, peanuts, honey, and other savory ingredients. A brilliant past, a better future. Like people in many African countries, the citizens of Mali and Guinea once had great faith in the ability of their modern political leaders to create better standards of living. However, by the 1980s, they had become disappointed. Poverty and saw corruption at every level of government. Their leaders seemed to only interested in self-enrichment. Plans for development usually resulted in more disappointment and hardship for ordinary people. At the beginning of the 1990s, both Guinea and Mali faced terrible economic problems, but during the decade, international trade began to increase, bringing gradual improvement of living standards. Nevertheless, the countries of West Africa, including Mali and Guinea, continue to suffer from a harmful reputation because the media places such emphasis on issues such as corruption, wars, and the AIDS, HIV epidemic. People in the United States and Europe tend to think of Africa as a place without hope. Most people never go to Africa to see what it is really like. Here's the area of the old Mali and the Mali, Ghana, and Songhai empires. It would have been in these regions. So you can see it's more north. It's more north in the Sahelian region. These was really Sahelian empires, right? It says more than 10 modern countries, including Mali, Guinea, and Senegal, are joined to the ancient lands of Ghana, Mali, and Songhai, as you can see here. The green area is the Mali Empire. The red stripe era is the Ghana Empire. See, modern Ghana is here, more southern by Benin and Togo, but the actual Ghana that it's named after was more north in the Mauritania, Senegal region, which you guys can see. And the purple is the Songhai Empire, which is in Niger, Mali, and stretching over to Bamako and Senegal, that you guys can see on the screen. It is not Africa's problems that should define it, but its people. Guinea is in the early stages of developing a tourist trade. Mali has already become a popular destination for visitors because of the ancient cities of Janneh and Timbuktu and its famous cultural attractions, including music, dance, and sculpture. Many first-time visitors to Mali and Guinea are shocked by the poverty they see, but also awed by the beauty of the landscape and the friendliness and ambition of the people. They see them working hard against great odds to improve their own lives, making the best of life. In the lands of former medieval empires, the standards of the city life are gradually improving. A visitor to the busy capital of Bamako might even be surprised to learn that Mali is still rated as one of the world's poorest countries. The city center is filled with people buying and selling merchandise, and the 2 bridges over the Niger River connecting Bamako's main districts have traffic jams. Although neighborhoods in Guinea's capital of Conakry have electricity only at night, The busy city centers are crowded with people logging on to the internet. Traffic is congested there too because Conakry is on a narrow peninsula with the Atlantic Ocean on three sides. However, in the more rural towns and villages of Mali and Guinea, most houses still lack running water. Instead, they are covered with neighborhood wells with hand pumps. Lines form as women and girls gather with their buckets and tubs and socialize while waiting their turn to pump the water. The metal tubs are so heavy when filled that it takes two women to lift onto it the carrier's head. In the thousands of communities where there is no electricity, people take advantage of nights when there is a full moon. Children will play outdoors until after midnight, with the game hide and seek being among their favorite. When mangoes are ripe, they also keep the ears turned to the thump sound. Keep their ears turned to the thump sound of falling fruit. When they hear a mango hit the ground, they race to find it and share it among their friends. Adults listen to battery-powered radios and portable tape players, or they may gather in a neighbor's yard to watch videos on a monitor powered by generators. Since commercial films on cassettes and DVDs have become increasingly available in these towns, enterprising individuals have built video palaces in the form of large grass huts with benches. Videos are rented in town and brought out to the villages for inexpensive nightly showings that are very popular with young people. In Mali and Guinea, people are also excited that American citizens elected a president whose father was from Kenya. After the 2009 elections, pictures of Barack Obama were placed in taxi windows. Stores were named after him, and people sold posters of the president and his family. Much has changed in West Africa since the days of the medieval empires, but the market is still central to the village life. This image shows a Mali market in 2007. Whatever the hardships of modern life, the Mandi and Songhai people remain conscious of the glorious heritage that links them to the medieval empires of Ghana, Mali, and Songhai. On special occasions, their jelly continues to tell stories of their ancestors and remind people of their history. These famous ancestors still define the identity of the descendants who carry their names. Whenever people meet, they salute each other with their family names. In this way, there are special degrees of mutual respect among family members and between their family and other families. No descendants of the heroes and heroines of the medieval empire will ever forget their ancestors, because if they did, they will lose their identities and self-respect. Pride in the ancestors of Ghana and Mali and Songhai carries over into everyone's daily life and inspires them to succeed in the modern world. And that is the end of the book, and it gives you a brief timeline. Again, we finished books over here with pro-literacy. You know how we rocking, man. 1500 BC is the beginnings of ironworking in West Africa. 200 CE, the camel was first used in the Sahara to transport goods. 500, 700 Common Era, the rise of Ghana Empire. 570, the Prophet Muhammad, founder of Muslim, is born in Mecca. 750 to 950 CE, the Songhai Kingdom of Gayo becomes an important endpoint for trade across the Sahara. This leads to increased prosperity and political influence for the Songhai and the Middle Niger River region. 1035, as one of the religious obligations of Islam, Hajj, Chief Yahya ibn Ibrahim makes a pilgrimage to Mecca. He returns with Abdallah ibn Yassin, who will be the founder of the Almoravids, a powerful fundamentalist Islamic group that establishes in the 11th century empire in Western Sahara. 1076 CE, the Almoravids take control of the Soninke territory, sending the ancient Ghana Empire into decline. Circa 1235, Suhata, legendary founder of the Mali Empire, and his Mandi army defeats Susu at the Battle of Dakahalan near Karina. They establish a new Mandi state that develops into the Mali Empire. 1324, Mansa Musa of the Empire of Mali makes a pilgrimage to Mecca. 1352, 1353, the Arab traveler and geographer Ibn Battuta visits Mali in the court of Mansa Suleiman, Emperor of Mali. 1460, C. Suleiman Dama, founder of the Seed dynasty of the Kingdom of Gayo, captures Mima, signaling the decline of the Mali Empire. 1469, C. Ali Biri, ruler of the Kingdom of Gayo, conquers Timbuktu as he expands the Kingdom of Gayo into the Songhai Empire. 1492, C. Ali Biri dies. 1493, Askia Muhammad the Great, Emperor of Songhai, establishes a new Songhai ruling dynasty. 1591, a Moroccan army invades Songhai. This leads to the defeat of the Askia dynasty of Songhai. Songhai is ruled by Moroccan administrators. 1884 to 1885, the representatives of 14 European nations, the United States, meet at the Berlin Conference to decide who will conquer which parts of Africa. 1893 to 1894, French forces conquered Janneh and Timbuktu. 1899, French forces captured Gayo, completing their conquest of the territories of the former medieval empires of Ghana, Mali, and Songhai. 1958, Guinea votes to be independent from France. 1960, the Republic of Mali gains its independence from France. And that's the end of the book. Hopefully you guys learned something about these West African kingdoms in the Common Era, Ghana, Mali, Songhai. The first portions of this book, I'm going to put all of these videos into a playlist so you guys can just go watch them in succession from the beginning to the end, all three parts. First portion of these books dealt with a lot of the folklore and the mythicism and the origins of these groups by their tradition. Second part dealt with their culture and their society, which we just read. And then the final epilogue deals with what happens after that, right? When the European scramble of Africa happened. As you can see, it happens late in history. It happens in the 19th century, not during the slave trade era, because Africa still had strong empires in that time. The Portuguese actually tried to invade and they lost. So let that be noted, right? With that being said, I hope somebody learned something out there and you got something from this series and you learned a little bit about West African history as it relates to Ghana, Mali, and Songhai, the ancestors, and the progeny. With that, be out of here, man. Yeah, I know we pro-literacy, man. Let's get it. Hibachi. This 7 candlesticks up, and I've been telling you niggas, it ain't a debate. It's a stick up. Gang.
Thank you, Fizzle.
He ran up on a chop, he's a boxer. Pow, right in the kisser. It's a stick, that's a drum, I'll drop some, nigga. Pow, right in the kisser. I'ma shoot the K until the cops come. Pow, right in the kisser. We did him like that cause he's a spot burner. Pow, right in the kisser. Pull up with the stick with the drum, who won't run with me? Pow, right in the kisser. Stupid shells dumping out the chop, it's a hundredty. Pow, right in the kisser. I'ma pull it out the Louis bag, don't come for me. Pow, right in the kisser. I just stumped a nigga in some Christian Louboutins. Pow, right in the kisser. I just shot a nigga granny house, don't care who in there. Pow, right in the kisser. I can't trust the niggas that I hang with, they be shooting kids. Pow, right in the kisser.
I smoke a nigga like a Swiss or a pack of cigs.
Pow, right in the kisser.
I pull up with a chop on the ops and split a wig. For real.
Pow, right in the kisser.
I broke his bitch, he popping, now I'm popping on fed.
Pow, right in the kisser.
We didn't drop by, we walked him down, put him in a ditch.
Pow, right in the kisser.
I got this FN across a nigga, treat him like a Christian.
Pow, right in the kisser.
And my Christian Louboutins running, chasing me a victim.
Pow, right in the kisser.
This 762's flipping, I put him in a blender.
Pow, right in the kisser.
A bartender, I give him shots, now he look drunk like he on liquor.
Pow, right in the kisser.
Those are not Glocks, buddy, those are ghost guns.
Pow, right in the kisser.
My homie smoked too many ops, he don't got no lungs.
Pow, right in the kisser.
223 shells, nigga, that's for King Kong.
Pow, right in the kisser.
Go play that Roof Chris, bitch, that's my theme song.
Pow, right in the kisser.
In this belly backpack is a big strap.
Pow, right in the kisser.
He got flip hollows, turned him to a Big Mac.
Turn his dumb ass to a burger or something.
Pow, right in the kisser.
Dead man, that's a homie you can't get back.
He's no longer, he can't come back.
Pow, right in the kisser.
Stripping every buster nigga at them kickbacks.
They have no chains on them.
Pow, right in the kisser.
Riding around the city with 2 straps, I feel like John Wick.
Pow, right in the kisser.
Caught in front of that stove, so I flicked him like a bit.
Like a lighter.
Pow, right in the kisser.
Bitches choosing side cause they knowin' we the shit.
Them niggas, we got sticks.
Pow, right in the kisser.
But we don't give them shit, we just run them, then we dip.
We did.
Pow, right in the kisser.
Bro drive Philly, so I had to place the order.
The order?
Pow, right in the kisser.
Chop his head off and throw his body across the border.
I flipped him like a quarter.
Pow, right in the kisser.
You was not a slaughter, nigga, you the hood porter.
Those are the stones you think shit.
Power right in the kisser.
You could date the bitch if you got the feed to afford her.
You can't buy that music.
Power right in the kisser. He's never coming back in that stack. Power right in the kisser. I'ma shoot it till my hand cramp. Power right in the kisser. I ain't finna go in bareback, bitch. Power right in the kisser. You love me, then come let my friends crash. Power right in the kisser. I caught him like in a C-class. Power right in the kisser. They gon' have to run a beat back. Power right in the kisser. You go against the team, you need cash. Power right in the kisser. I caught his mama at the repass. Power right in the kisser.
Another nigga dead, you gotta deal with it.
I mean, it's been a long ass time ago.
Power right in the kisser.
You an internet thug, I'm in the real trenches.
You just pop it on the ground, weird ass nigga.
Power right in the kisser.
He wanna squabble up, I wanna kill niggas.
I'ma hit him with this chop, we ain't gon' box.
Power right in the kisser.
I'm from the stink team and saw real niggas.
We run this shit, y'all weird.
Power right in the kisser.
I nutted her face and told her deal with it.
Splashed all on the motherfucker's face.
Power right in the kisser.
I was cooking in the county on the grill, nigga.
I was whipping up all type of fancy shit.
Power right in the kisser.
I was really in K-Town taking field trips.
The Ling Ling, May Ling, Kim Long and all.
Power right in the kisser.
All dome shot, we tryna split wigs.
We tryna rearrange some shit.
Power right in the kisser.
Man, niggas know what the fuck going on, nigga.
Power right in the kisser.
Man, he's never coming back in that stat, nigga. Man, let that shit go, bro. Like, this shit is ridiculous. Like, you niggas still holding on to grudges and all that shit from 3 years ago, man. Like,
Power right in the kisser.
I'm just saying, like, y'all niggas, like, it's come on, bro. Like,
Power right in the
like,
kisser.
it's over with, bro. Like, you man, like, come on,
Power
bro.
right in the kisser.
He's never coming back in that stat. Like,
Power right in the kisser.
like, just face it, bro. Like, y'all just holding on to this shit, like, nigga.
Power right in the
What
kisser.
y'all gonna do? Wait till somebody else get flipped? Like, what's going on?
Power right in the kisser.
Yeah, exactly, nigga. Yeah.
Power right in the kisser. Power right in the kisser.
Power right in the kisser. Power right in the kisser. Power right in the
Power
kisser.
right in the kisser.
Come on, bro.
Power right
He's
in the
no
kisser.
longer.